Welcome back, folks, to the Get a Grip on Life podcast. On today's show, I have Ian Slater. We're going to talk Dungeons and Dragons. Come on, that's right. But before we do that, if you want to start a podcast of your own, if you want to create some digital video media, there's nowhere better to do it if you live in Toronto than Get a Grip Studios, man. Come on. Close to the 407, close to the 404, close to the 401. Accessible. We're the only guys that aren't downtown. That's right. And Scott sits there all day, and we are fully virtual. We're remote. We can come to you too. So go to getagripstudios.com. Welcome to the studio, Ian. I love having people in studio, man. So married, father of three. Okay, so not a lot of people start their bios off with who they are in terms of their personal life. Right. And it's interesting because I always say to my kids, what are you going to be when you grow up, right? Or this sort of stuff. And I say to them, what's the most important job you're ever going to have? It's going to be a dad. It's going to be a mom, right? It is actually, when you think about it, the most important thing you're going to do. So you put it right out there. What do you got? Boys, girls? Parent? Like, you ever talk to someone who's going to be a parent?
Oh, yeah.
They're all cocky, right? Yeah.
It'll be easy.
Father of the year, eh, buddy?
Yeah.
And, it's always funny, the longer you're a parent, the more kids I have, and the longer I'm married, the more humble I've become, man, when it comes to that.
You start to realize your limitations, and you see the results of your work and go, oh, I could have done that a bit better.
Sure. And there's nothing more humbling than being a dad with a teenager, man.
Yeah, I'm getting there. Well, my 16-year-old's actually really good. He's not a problem. And he's what got me into D&D, believe it or not, again. Got me back into gaming.
Back into it, yeah.
Yeah, because he asked me to do a birthday party for him. And I'm like, sure. And it got me back in. But he's great. Like, he's a great kid. He's on a good path and stuff like that. No.
No. But he's a good kid.
Two of them fight a lot. The third's fine.
Okay, I got to ask you, a historian of technology, man. Like that's got to start off with like a little bit of... Oh, come on, Marshall McLuhan first, just to get it tight, start up, right? Like, first we shape technology, then technology shapes us, this kind of stuff, right?
Yeah.
So when you say you're a historian of technology, how far are you going back to Gutenberg? Like, where do you start off with that?
Well, what happened was I did 2 years of engineering and didn't like it at the end of the day, and didn't like the culture of it very much either, because it was a little too much guy stuff and some weird racial shit going on too. Pardon me.
Yeah.
So I don't know if I can swear or not. Sorry.
Yeah, you can swear.
There you have it. So I eventually got into the humanities, but I had a technical background, so that's what got me interested in it. And I was very interested in technology. That's what got me into engineering. So once I got into history, I discovered you don't have to just study the history of a place or a particular time. You can study things. So I was like, oh, I can do that. So I ended up focusing on technology.
Well, all subjects are history.
Yeah.
I mean, you're studying the history of mathematics.
Yeah.
You're studying the history of physics.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? When you're studying, you're studying history.
Sure.
When you're applying, it's a different story. Now you're maybe practicing science or whatever. But when you're in school, you're studying history. Yeah. It just depends on which subject of history you're studying. That could be anything, mathematics to gender
I like
studies.
that perspective. I'm into that.
Yeah, no, it's all history, man. It just depends on. It depends. I think the difference becomes whether you're taking a philosophical approach to it or not. It becomes a humanity when you're looking at it in terms of its place amongst the naked apes.
Sure.
Or whatever, you know what I mean? I think that's where it takes a different side to it. Yeah. So you started playing Dungeons and Dragons when you were 10. So this is back at board game and dice days, right?
Pre-internet. Woo.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know how old you are, but you look
50.
like, So you're 80s, you're doing this.
Yeah. Exactly.
Right?
Yeah.
And then I remember when I was went back then, Dungeons and Dragons was like something you don't want to get involved in that Dungeons and Dragons, man.
Yeah, there was a lot of negative press about it. There was a couple of things happened, but essentially a university student committed suicide while they were doing a more they call LARPing. They were actually dressing up like the characters and going into the sewers around the school and sort of live role playing their stuff. And the guy had some issues, and he ended up killing himself, and that sort of triggered a lot of conservative people in the States to go, hey, wait a minute, this is a bad thing. And then the problem with D&D when, at least the edition that was played when I was a kid, which was first edition, is that the books are all very evocative. So there's a big demon on the front of the player's handbook. There's a big demon on the front of on the front of the Dungeon Master's Guide. If you look at that stuff, there's stats for devils and demons. If you look at the spells in the book, you can summon demons, you can control it. Like, it's all there. And I think some people who had a sort of a mindset already that anything even remotely related to that was bad sort of looked at it and went, whoa, what are we teaching kids here? Are they learning real spells?
Well, I mean, you could make the same argument for Lord of the Rings.
Yeah, you could. Any sort of fantasy property has those sort of context.
I mean, orcs are pretty nasty-looking creatures.
I think D&D just had more of a...
I think you actually, like, the goal of it was to become those characters in your mind or sort of manifest them in your imagination.
Yeah, role-play them and be them.
Yeah.
I think it just triggered a lot of things for people because it was a little more... They made it for an adult audience that wouldn't mind that kind of stuff.
Sure.
Right? So... I know it's funny. Sometimes I get the parents of the kids that I run games for. I kind of have a chat with them when they drop them off. I'm like, look, just so you know, this is the stuff we're using. They're always fine with it, but I could see why some parents might not be. Right? They might want something a little less, a little more sanitized. So it's just something to think about, right?
Yeah, I mean, it's those are the choices in life. I think we have to be careful when we're attributing the reasons to suicide.
Oh, of course. It's obviously complex.
Yeah, I mean, like if somebody's going to, hang it on a Dungeons and Dragons hook, I think
I heard this about heavy metal music for a while. I've heard about other things too. It's pretty common.
So you're playing in college, and then in the intervening years, the internet all of a sudden pops up. You start a family. Mm-hmm. Your son brings you back into the world. Where are we today with this thing?
Well, I'm now running 2 after-school programs at the Toronto JCC on Thursdays and Fridays for kids age 8 to 11, I guess, in the 2 different groups. Okay. I do birthdays occasionally. I do some after-school stuff at the local school. I've been in my kids' school a couple of times for things, and I've done ongoing campaigns as well. So somebody hires me to basically come twice a month and run 2 2-hour games at their house for their kids or whatever, and I do that. So I'm running 2 regular campaigns like that too. So I've got another job. I'm a university professor as well. And I'm the primary caregiver for the kids for the most part because my wife has a full-time job. So that's enough for now.
It sounds like a busy it's busy thing. But it's interesting. So you talk about role-playing. Like it says here, role-playing is recognized by psychologists as a method of bringing out new and unrealized aspects of people's personalities. Okay, that makes total sense to me. Yep. But is there a difference between that and acting?
Sure.
Stage acting.
Yeah, I think what happens with role-playing is that with acting, you're sort of given a role to play that somebody else has created for you. And they said, here you go, here's a character, play this character. With D&D, you may start off working with the DM to create your character, but once you have it, it's yours. You can do anything you want with it. There's no script. There's no act like this and behave like this. There's suggestions, like your characters are barbarians. You're probably like hitting people over the head with an axe and stuff.
Sure.
And people can ham that up in various ways, but you own your D&D character in a way that you don't own an actor, a role. I know to a certain degree, every actor brings their own personality to the role and does their own spin.
But it's like writing a sonnet. You have to do it within the iambic pentameter and whatever. It's
whatever the conditions are. Yeah.
But whereas you can actually, it's more. There's more of a play circuit being tripped with this.
Yeah, I think so. If you just an example that I always use because I know people who've done it before. If you've ever been to couples therapy, for example, what they'll often do. Well, there you go. So here's what you need to know. They'll often look and say, okay, you be your wife for a moment, and she'll be you, and let's run through what happens. And it sounds like such a simple thing. You're thinking, I can't possibly do anything meaningful. But I've seen how this works on people. Suddenly, you see yourself in somebody else's shoes. You're them, and it's like, oh, okay. Or you behave a different way. It connects up with you differently. So I think role-playing has that sort of fascinating ability. I have kids at the table who are very, very quiet in real life. Like they walk into the gaming session, they're not saying anything. They don't talk to the other kids. But when they're playing their character, they seem to feel okay to do other things. And I think it's because, when you've been told how to behave by your parents, by society, and all these other things, when you can be somebody else, it's like putting a mask on at a party, right? I've seen that happen too. People show up in costume, they behave differently.
That's why Halloween parties are always the best parties.
Exactly, right?
All the best parties I've ever been to have always been Halloween parties.
Yeah, so people feel a little freer to sort of do things differently or try something else. Like I know this is probably a stereotype for a lot of people who know things about the game, but when I was in high school, I had one of my buddies who I played with on a regular basis always played women. His characters were always women. Mm-hmm. And at the time, we razzed him a little for it off and on, depending on the situation. But oddly enough, after university, ran into him again. He'd come out of the closet and he was living a new life. And it's like, aha, there you go. He was experimenting. He was sort of seeing how it felt to sort of be a more feminine man, right?
It's interesting how, and I often call it fishing.
Yeah.
So when people are nervous about a lifestyle change that they want to make, say.
Yeah.
Okay, they practice something called fishing. I call it. This is just how I call it, where they say something that is maybe it's meant to be funny, but also meant to see what comes back.
see how people react to it. And,
Yes, and whether there's a disgust reaction or a curiosity reaction or whatever. So people fish one another. And I guess Dungeons and Dragons is a great place for people to go fishing.
I think absolutely it is. Yeah. And it can, I made gender as an obvious one because it was, kind of an interesting transition, but I've seen it happen with respect to just general personality. I've seen it happen with respect to leaders and followers. So, someone who's very much a follower in day-to-day life and sort of does what everybody else does. Sometimes they behave that way in the game too. It doesn't always change people, but it can give them an opportunity to try something, fish it, try out something different. And if they like that, well, then maybe they take that back into their day-to-day life too. I've also seen that. I've had parents come to me and say that kids that have played D&D for a little while are like, he seems a lot more confident and he seems willing to try things that he wasn't willing to try before, or he seems happier reading, for example, which is something that warms my heart because I'm a teacher.
Yeah, sure.
Reading's such a hard sell these days, but almost every single time one of the kids gets into the game, they want the rule books they want to read. They want to learn how to play. So suddenly they're in there, reading stuff where before they didn't have the motivation. I got into reading when I was a kid because of comic books.
Sure.
I'm sure I wouldn't have gone on and done all the things I did if I didn't get that interest in reading at a young age from comic books. But I think D&D is a real
I would
gateway.
say, all my kids are readers except my son.
Interesting. I have one child that isn't and two that are.
So I have all three of my girls. Now I'm not. I was a reader when I was a kid, so it's not a girl thing, guy thing.
No,
I know that.
Yeah,
I read books when I was a kid like crazy.
Yeah.
I'm wondering if it's the distraction of video games. That's one of the things.
I'm sure that's a lot of it.
I wonder if it's usually it's a mixture of frailties, these kind of things. You know what I mean? But some people aren't into reading. But one of the things that I think is very important is for kids to be read to when they're young.
Yeah. It's mimicry, right? You're absolutely right. Yeah. I teach a little bit about this kind of stuff just because of what I do. And one of the things that's happening, a guy named Nicholas Carr wrote a book about this, but essentially what it means is that when you use social media technology, like a phone, phones have warnings that pop up, notices and things like that. So if you're reading on your phone, so let's say you decide I want to read a particular book you're interested in.
Oh,
so
that Kindle thing? I can't read it. I can't read it.
But even if it's on your phone.
Yeah, on my phone, I can't read it because I get alerts all the time. I can't immerse myself in it.
Well, you see, you're exactly right. This is what Carr says. Carr says that when you're reading, your interpretive part of your brain is working and the visual receptive part of your brain is working. So you're taking in visual images and you're interpreting them. When something interrupts you, it triggers the decision-making part of your brain. There's technical terms for these, but I don't remember them. The decision-making part of your brain is different than the visual part of your brain. And if while you're reading something that happens, it interrupts the flow of interpretation, it interrupts the flow of memory, it interrupts all that kind of stuff. When you go back to it, you've lost that little bit, and it's hard to get back on track. So essentially what happens is the more you use social media technology, the more your brain becomes conditioned and actually responds to being distracted. So it makes it harder to read. Reading requires extended focus concentration. So Carr's argument is that the more social media technologies we use, the more time we spend on the computer, the less likely it is we're going to want to read because our reading skills will atrophy and get worse. And that's exactly what you're seeing. Like as a university professor, I can tell you this much. I poll my kids every year because I'm a numbers junkie. I want to know what people think about stuff, and I have this audience of 300 students in front of me that have to answer my questions. It's all right, let's go. Yeah. And one of the things you talk to them about is
poor students are always getting experimented on.
Yeah, no, absolutely. That's what they're there for. I want to learn. It's a data gathering opportunity. So when I started teaching 18 years ago, I had a set of standard questions that I've asked, and I've asked them every year since then. And I do it, 3 classes a year, so I get a pretty decent sample size. And it's York at Go Lions. It's York, so it's pretty representative. Like it's a pretty broad, diverse range of students.
You mean in terms of cultures and ethnic
exactly.
backgrounds?
There's lots of different kinds of people there in front of me, so you're getting a good sample. And I sampled them for things like how many of you work, and the stats on that have gone from around 50% when I started 18 years ago to around 85% now.
So 50 to 85. So the less full-time students is what you're saying. They're working part-time.
They're working part. That's part. I was about to get to the full-time part. So that's the part-time working students are about 85%. The full-time working students are cruising around 50. Now, these are people that have full-time jobs and still squeeze in school. Now, I worked part-time all through my degree, and a full-time a couple of summers and stuff like that. But working full-time while you're going to school, that's a challenge. So I talked to them about transit issues and stuff, but I also asked them about reading. And I do it at the end of the term too to say, okay, how much of the reading did you actually do in this class, right? And you never know how representative the data is, but
admit it.
But you know what? I do that too. I tease them a lot as well.
So I studied English Lit.
Oh, okay.
Okay.
So you had to read, right?
Yeah. So I did. I took a course, Conrad and Lawrence.
Right.
So we read all D.H. Lawrence and all Joseph Conrad. Oh, These are major stuff, right?
Yeah, it's a lot of stuff.
One a week, right?
Yeah.
And you're talking the rainbow. Like you couldn't get. I'm like. Okay.
Oh, yeah.
So I would say 70% of the people didn't read the books.
Yeah. Well, these days the stats on that are basically creeping up to it's around 75% of the students either don't do any of the readings, or only do the bare minimum necessary to do the first assignment that I base directly on a reading. So and then it breaks down based on a whole bunch of other different factors. But I've had students that have come to me at the end of the year and say, I didn't read anything in this class. I just came to your lectures, right? And you know what? They don't do as well. As much as I'd love to say just coming to my lectures is enough, you'll do really well. It isn't. You actually do need to read the stuff. And it's hard to get them to see the value of that, because I think it comes down to what you were saying before about getting interrupted and distracted. I don't think they can muster the focus to pay attention to stuff for long enough to learn it.
Yeah.
And it's hard, right?
You ever pick up a Life magazine from the 1950s? Like a Time magazine or National Geographic?
Yeah.
Bro, it's just pure long-form journalism.
Yeah, it's dense. It's dense text, yeah.
I mean, a National Geographic article now is probably... Now, mind you, I've read a couple of them, and there is a Charles Dickens sense that someone's getting paid by the word here.
Yeah, a little Florida.
Yeah, I mean, there's a part of me that likes the brevity. Is good.
Yeah, I think that's the only thing Twitter did for us, actually.
Yeah,
it helped us to be a little more brief with our expressions, right?
Yeah, I think so. But I think Twitter's done more harm than good, to be honest. I went on Twitter this morning after Brexit just to see, because the guy won, Boris Johnson.
Yeah, I heard. Yeah.
And the first thing I saw was this great cartoon of Donald Trump like this. I don't know how we got here, but we'll get back to Dungeons. Maybe this is part of Dungeons and Dragons, actually. So Donald Trump here, it's just hilarious. Right. And so it's like a cartoonized Donald Trump, and then a cartoonized Boris Johnson. And there's that little, that thing that represents speech above them. Yeah. And the little arrow going to both of them. And it says, nice hair. And I laughed at that this morning, dude.
That's spot on, though.
Oh, man, I laughed at that. Oh. So I went on Twitter this morning, and I'll tell you this, man. Both wings, when you get out to those wings, both people are obscene and disgusting, dude.
Yeah, you know what? It's interesting because I spend a lot of time on Twitter now. Not oddly enough to build the business, because I don't get any business out of it because I'm local and Twitter's not local, right?
Yeah,
so
for
it
sure.
Doesn't really help. I mainly do it to share with other creators, get ideas, pinch stuff. You know,
it's gross though, Twitter, dude.
Yeah, well, yeah, absolutely it is, and I think what helps me to sort of navigate it is I was on message board forums for Dungeons and Dragons called Dragon's Foot for 5 or 6 years, because when I got back into the game, I decided, you know what, I should bounce some ideas off people, because I haven't played for 5-10 years and all this kind of business. And I learned something from one of the moderators there. Message board moderators are great because they deal with a lot of stuff on a regular basis. And a guy named Matthew, said, look, man, here's the deal: play the ball, not the man. Never argue with another person and talk about them. Talk about their arguments. Keep it focused on the thing you're arguing about, not on them. And that's I'm a fairly left-leaning fellow in many, many political ways, but that's the issue that I have a lot these days, is that there's a lot of personal stuff going on. So and I know why, because a lot of people feel very meaningfully, existentially threatened, right? Like if you were LGBTQ living in certain parts of the world, you'd be terrified by somebody like Trump. Sure. And so I get that, and I get for them it might be a slightly different experience. But I find that if you want to have sort of meaningful interchange between people, and I think that's kind of the point, right? If you disagree with somebody, you can either write them off or you can try to change their minds. And some people will say, "Oh, you'll never change that person's mind." No, but there's other people listening, right? I say this to my students all the time. I don't allow them to line up after a class. No lining up. Sit in your seats. Put up your hand. What's your question? They're like, well, I want to talk to you. I'm like, oh, is it a personal thing?
Oh, you mean like the professor after?
Yeah, so after class. Normally after class there's a big lineup. There's no lineup in my class. Sure. You sit. And I've had a student say, well, why can't we just line up and talk to you? It's like, well, A, I'll answer the same question 15 times, so no thank you. Yeah. And B, if you ask a question sitting in a group full of people, then some other people in that group are going to listen and go, hey, I had that question too. And the number one problem with students is they think, my question is stupid, I don't want to ask it. The prof's going to look at me and think I'm a moron. It's like, no, actually, they're going to think you're perceptive for asking the question. Yes. And the more other people you hear asking questions, the more confident you become in doing that, right? There's sort of a public aspect to things that's important. So I think that can actually be.
Yeah, I agree with you on that. And I think that I think the idea of a left wing and a right wing is anachronistic in 2019.
It's also exaggerated, right?
It is.
People exaggerate differences and make it sound. That's the other thing that's, I think, been lost significantly. It's a little off topic, but the ability to agree with you about all this, but say no about that.
Yeah, for sure.
We seem to be losing that. So I can, I've been called.
People are trying to find. Not trying to find common ground. They're trying to find where they disagree and split up.
Yeah, because they want to be able to say, "Oh, you're one of those. I don't want to be around
I want to label you."
Yeah, no, absolutely.
Label you.
It's why when I'm in class and somebody says something, rather than labeling them some way, which may be appropriate in certain other contexts,
Sure.
but not in a classroom. In a classroom, I'll say, well,
Well, you're the
here's-
teacher.
Yeah. Here's what I disagree with about what you just said.
Yeah,
So
sure.
it's not personal. I'm not going to call you
Sure.
a name. I'm instead going to say, because I want to convince you you're wrong and change your mind, right?
Or you know,
Yeah.
sometimes it's like I want to publicly humiliate you, and I think that's where the difference is.
Absolutely. I see a lot of that going on. And
Yeah.
it's the kind of thing where I've been told a couple of times, or I've seen people being told, I should say, a couple of times on Twitter, well, you need to do the homework.
To
Right?
you.
No, not to me.
Oh.
So here's what will happen. Somebody will come along and say, I think we should do the following thing politically. And somebody else is like, well, I don't understand why you'd want to do that. This doesn't make any sense to me. What about this, this, and this?
Yeah, sure.
And rather than explain to them their position and say, well, here's why, they say, well, no. You can go do the homework, buddy. You go do the work to figure this out. You go use Google. I shouldn't have to do the labor of helping you understand this. And I know why that happens. That happens because there's certain groups of people who have, like, let's say you happen to be disabled.
Okay.
You might get tired of talking about disability issues. You might be like, you know what? I don't want to talk about this anymore. I talk about this every day.
Sure.
So somebody else can do the labor here. I get that. But, I'm a teacher. So
Sure.
that's my labor, right? So when I'm involved in a discussion with someone, I'm never going to say, look, you go do the reading, even if it is an obvious thing. I'm going to sit down and talk with them about it.
Sure.
Because you kind of learn after a while teaching that nothing's really obvious. It seems obvious because you've been taught it and you know it.
Sure.
And to you, it might be obvious.
We have that problem all the time with the lighting show. So I run a lighting
yeah.
association.
Right.
Right. And so there's all these different lighting companies, Ledvance, Leducation, blah, 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 right? And so Scott will be doing a publication or something and he'll mix up Leducation and Ledvance. It's so obvious to everybody the difference between those two things, right? Don't you get it? No, of course not, man. I'm into this stuff every day. I see these things all the time. It feels normal for you to know the difference between Leducation and Ledvance and remember that.
Yeah.
But the average person running around, dude, they need to encounter that 500 times before they actually... It starts to become like a regular thing to them. That's why people can kind of get trapped in their departments, which is, I think, is a good segue to go back to role playing.
Yeah.
Where I think role playing kind of gets you out of your presuppositions.
Yeah, it can. Absolutely can. Yeah,
and it helps people. Like, I mean, and in a sense, even Shakespeare would say we're all playing roles out there in a way.
Oh, absolutely. There's well-known psychological theories that suggest that you're always playing a role. So sometimes I'm being a father, sometimes I'm being a teacher, sometimes I'm doing this, sometimes I'm doing that. You're always playing some sort of a role. No, all those roles make up who you are, right?
Sure.
It's not illegitimate or false. It's just how you act in the world. But
and also, I would say not only that though, but I would say that, like, I would add to that I believe in free choice, but I also believe that there's like a deterministic imposition that happens because humans are kind of like social chameleons.
Yes. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
So like, a person, like, let's say one person is in a relationship with this person, they may behave a completely different way than if they're in a relationship with this person. They may be dominant in this one, submissive in that one.
Yeah.
They
Absolutely.
may, I think the one thing that I think is really interesting is and I don't want to open this can of worms, but
Right.
a lot of white people have never been in a room with mostly black people.
Yes.
For example.
Yeah. Absolutely. Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Whereas I think the reverse happens all the time.
I think it does too. Yep.
Right?
Yeah.
So, and you're sitting around, it's not a big deal. Nobody cares here. But actually, there actually is a perception to that. I walked into a nightclub that was all black in Durham, North Carolina once by accident.
Yeah.
And it was like mind blowing to me to do that.
Yeah,
actually,
I can imagine. Yeah.
You know, and so we're in these environments. So all of a sudden, you have to change your role, right? You have to behave differently. You're trying to be very mindful of what's going on.
May not even be aware of it.
Yeah. But it's also a period of time when you can really learn.
Yeah. I can see that totally.
You can learn who you are, and I think that's why role playing is very important. So tell me a little bit about how you do this for companies, like, and how it helps companies.
Right. Well, there's a couple of things going on there. The first one is finding out what their goal is. Sometimes their goal is just to have their employees have some fun. Right?
Sure.
Just go out, have a good time. And sometimes they look at this and say, well, I know the demographic in my company is of the age that they probably either played a little D&D as a kid, so it'll be a fun kind of thing for them to do. Other times they're coming to you because there's something going on. They have a dysfunction of some sort. So, I'm sending this unit of guys from the accounting department and they're not getting along and there's been a lot of power struggles and all that kind of stuff. So depending on how much the employer is comfortable talking about for HR reasons, right?
Sure.
I usually do a little debrief where I say, well, can you give me any suggestions, or do you have any ideas about how these people are interacting? So they might say, Bill and Bob, for example, have been competing a lot lately and not getting along very well. The last two big clients they worked on, they had a lot of fights and disagreements in the office. So I keep that in mind when I'm picking the characters and designing the adventures. So it might require, like D&D sort of almost sort of at its core, a teamwork-based game. Because it's so dangerous and deadly, you don't cooperate with the other people you're playing with, you don't last real long. That's just the way it rolls, right? So you it's baked into the game that you have to be at least to some degree cooperative. It's not like a project at work where if you don't work well together, you don't deliver for the client. It's you die and you're done, right?
But it's kind of a reflection of the real world in a sense.
Oh, absolutely.
Like if we don't work together, we die.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Yeah, it's sort of exaggerated for the purposes of the game.
Yeah, sure.
So that's the other thing I try to focus on is that what are they looking for? Are they looking to bring them together and teach them to cooperate a little bit and give them the experience of having a positive cooperative experience together and say, oh, it was kind of fun actually,
You're
working
not
together.
A dick.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly right. Or you just want to entertain them. And then that can change the way you sort of organize things in the game. And you can make sure that if the two guys that are having a hard time together might in particular have to work together at some point or not. But, you just build it into the design a little bit more to sort of give them that kind of experience. So
is it more of a masculine thing? Like do men respond better to Johnson? Like would you say that?
Not at all. No? Not at all. Yeah. It's I think there's lots of popular.
You said guys, right?
Well,
and
that's just
I don't know if
socialization.
maybe all your clients are men. I don't know.
To be fair, I can give you the gender breakdown because I track this too.
Come on, man.
There it is. I have about 80 to 90% of my clientele is male.
Yes, that's how I would have thought that.
And you'd be right. Now, but that doesn't mean it always is. So, for example, I had a birthday party about 6 months ago where I got contacted by the parent, and they said it's my daughter's birthday and she wants to have a D&D party because she did D&D at Harborfront last summer or something like that. All right. Yeah. So I showed up for a game with 4 12-year-old girls, and what was fascinating for me is that I often use scenarios that I run in my home game with my son and his friends. I sort of package those up and use them to run for a birthday party or something like that, just to use the work. And so I picked one of the sessions. So I just had the experience of running 8, at that time, 12 and 13-year-old boys through this scenario, and I was about to run 4 12-year-old girls through this scenario. So like, bing, awesome. I can keep track of the differences and stuff. And what ended up, the challenge, the adventure in question was this wizard had come to them and said, look, wizards in D&D make spells and create magic items with rare and special components, things that are hard to get, right?
Okay. So like alchemists.
Yeah, exactly like alchemists. So the argument was that this wizard had been getting this rare undersea stuff from squid ink, from this race of underwater dwelling creatures, and they just stopped one day providing him with it. So he hired the adventurers to go down. He gave them a spell that allowed them to breathe underwater, go down, figure out what's going on, and reestablish that supply for me. Because with squid ink ends up being the thing you need to write scroll spells. So if you don't have it in D&D, you can't do anything. So it was a big deal, right? So they get when the boys did this, they went down. They found the group of creatures that was harvesting this stuff, and they talked to them for a little while, and then they decided they weren't getting what they wanted, so they sort of bulled their way in to try to steal something from them. That turned into a fight. They ran away from that. They ended up, the long story short is they killed a bunch of stuff. Okay. They used all their powers, and they sort of bulled their way into getting what they wanted, which was forcing the undersea people to fulfill the conditions of their contract, basically.
Okay, right? Yeah.
When the girls did this adventure, they came down, they talked to the leader of the undersea creatures, and talked to a whole bunch of other people in the town, like not just the leaders, but other people in the town, this underwater village. And they discovered that about 2 or 3 months ago, their leader started acting very differently. Everybody was sort of whispering about it because in D&D, they have something called an encounter reaction roll. And if you were trying to convince somebody or talk to somebody about something, you roll it to see how they react. They got good encounter reaction rolls. They got information. And what they found out was something had happened to their leader about 3-4 months ago. And oddly enough, he stopped supplying this stuff for this wizard. Maybe there's a connection. So a little more sniffing around, and they found out that this evil creature called a Naga had come in and was mind controlling this leader to do this stuff for various different reasons. So they found the Naga there. They fulfilled some condition of defeating them, and then it was over. And no casualties, no fuss, no muss. They did research. They studied the situation. They talked to each other about what to do.
Were the girls older than the boys?
No, they were about a year younger.
You're younger
at the time. But it was, I know it's a stereotype that women are more collaborative and men are more aggressive. But in this particular case,
I think I would say this. I would say that the feminine is more collaborative And the masculine
and
is...
guys can have feminine characteristics.
Exactly.
So therefore,
Yeah.
No, nice take, actually.
Yeah, I think, because
Yeah.
I just think the two things, people get mixed up with this, and people get their backs up about this sort of stuff,
Yeah.
and they throw it into debates where it doesn't belong, like who's allowed in what bathroom.
Yeah.
I would say you're probably 51% masculine, 49% feminine.
Yeah. Yeah.
And the difference is that you have a dick.
Yeah, no, absolutely.
No, I'm serious. And
genetics sort of agrees with you on that, right?
Well, and one of the problems too is like with, you mentioned marital therapy, okay?
Yep.
One of the things, and I'm weird. I love Audible. So I've always loved audiobooks, even back in the days of CDs. And back when I was Joseph Conrad, I'd be looking for tapes to read The Rainbow. You know what I mean? Because it's so brutal sometimes. Like, I'm serious. The Rainbow was the worst one. Okay, I like Sons and Lovers, but The Rainbow was the worst one. Where was I though? I was going to say something. I forgot.
Audio.
Back one more before that. Oh yeah, so I went on a deep dive where I read all this. I read mostly nonfiction now. I read all these different books on marital therapy and attachment therapy and different kinds of attachment theories and different kinds of ways that humans form relationships and ways that they can become perverted and ways that they can be screwed up and what a stable couple looks like.
All right.
I just read all kinds of, like, maybe. Oh, from John Gottman. I don't know if you know that guy. Anyway, just all PhD stuff. I don't like to go away from the PhDs.
Sure.
I think you go down a weird rabbit hole. No, but when you're coming new to a subject, it's always good to start with a PhD. You don't want to get into some guru guy who thinks, you know what I'm saying?
Look for credentials first.
Yeah.
You can broaden your horizons.
So exactly. Yeah. So I went down this rabbit hole, and what I noticed was that people seem to stereotype. There's different ways that humans will attach to one another. And when you go to when you see therapists, a lot of times you'll read therapists, and I read actually dialogues of therapy too, even was part of it, or listen to them on Audible, right? And listen to it. And a lot of therapists are looking to put the man in a certain category of that they've predetermined a man goes in.
Yeah.
Okay? And they're looking to put a woman in a certain category, in a predetermined category that a woman goes into. Yeah. And that's the Hollywood couple of avoidant male and needy woman.
Yep. I can see that totally.
And a lot of therapists, like even PhDs, are trying to press this model forward because it probably suits, say, 60% of men and 60% of women. It fits, right? Yep. And so, and then anytime I'm seeing anything else, those people are really screwed up. You know what I'm saying? But maybe they're just doing something different, dude. Like, and something else is going on, and maybe that guy is displaying is the needy one in the relationship. Yeah. Right?
In this particular case.
Yes.
Yeah.
And the female is the dismissive one in the relationship. And you're inverting it and trying to find the neediness in the dismissive person and the dismissiveness in the needy person. Does that make sense what I'm saying?
Absolutely makes sense what you're saying, yeah. I think people have models that they use that work for them, and maybe that's how they were trained and stuff like that, and they just project that stuff forward, right?
And they can't help anyone that doesn't fit into their model.
Yeah, and lots of people don't fit into the model, right? So
yeah, sure.
Yeah.
It's funny, and I think it's useful to play a role. This podcast is about playing. I'm playing the role of podcast host right now. You're playing the role of podcast guest.
Absolutely.
In this game, do you get to kill me in the end, or what happens?
It's not in the contract, man.
Yeah. So, tell me a little bit about back to the employees, though, because I think that's what you want to talk about, and kind of where I want to take this thing now. Group dynamics. So I run a business out here.
Right.
Okay. And there are times when I think, gosh, this person is not doing this, and they're doing it not to help the company or the customer. They're doing it to stick it to the other guy over there.
Yeah.
Right? You know what I'm saying, right?
Oh, I know exactly what you're saying.
There's a thwarting going on, or there's a quest to take credit going on.
Empire building. That's
yes,
what they
or
often
something.
call it, right? Yeah.
How would the team building involved in Dungeons and Dragons help people out with that?
Well, I think it's interesting because empire building and people sort of competing against each other is usually done in the context of either a personal issue because they don't like the person that much for whatever reason, so they just want to be the one to beat them, or it's involved in sort of getting more clout at work, getting higher salary or whatever. There's sort of pretty tangible rewards associated with that, right?
Especially in the workplace.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Yeah.
Sure.
Promotions, office space.
Cash. Yeah, sure.
Yeah, I worked at a law firm for
parking spots.
15 years, and it was wild when a lawyer would leave and the office was made available. it was like blood sport because the size of your office, where it looked out onto, all that mattered to every single lawyer there. So if a person came out of the system, then somebody else would be like, oh no, I want that office, right? And it became this hugely personal thing. And if you put a percentage on it, how much of the behavior people are exhibiting at work is related to that kind of stuff, as opposed to the goals of dealing with the clients, doing things for the business. I'd be quite comfortable with an estimate of around 50% for a lot of places. I think it's really high. I think there's a lot more personal shit going on. Personal stuff going on. Realizing I don't know, no idea if I should be doing that.
There's some personal shit going on here too. So I'll give you an anecdote, and if they listen to this, they'll laugh. So there's one of the guys. He's whatever. He's one of my top guys. Okay. Been with the company since the early 90s, before I even, before my dad was running it.
Right.
And he parks in the same spot every day out there. Okay.
I think I know where this is going.
Okay. When he goes on vacation,
right,
there's another guy here that parks in that spot.
Just because he can.
And I just think to myself, like, oh, man. I'll drive it because I park. I don't have a spot. I just park where I park as far as I can, kind of within the zone in front of our shop. So I'm not offending the neighbors. You know what I'm saying?
Sure.
You want to keep it friendly.
Absolutely.
If one of the neighbors' like one of the business people that work at the business parks in front of my shop, it's a little bit offensive.
Yeah.
That's for customers and for us, right? We don't park in front of your shop. But anyway, he parks in the same spot. And when that guy goes away, he parks in. I just think to myself, like, that's
what's going on there, eh?
It's one of those things. But I think there is like can I give you can we go back to the masculine and feminine here? I want to throw an idea at you because it's interesting. So I think and I did a deep dive on anthropology and evolutionary biology and Chris Ryan kind of stuff, sex at dawn kind of thing. I'm interested in that topic too. Oh. Whenever I can find something like that, I kind of sink my teeth into it. And I think women, as a general rule, will seek some form of status in a man.
Okay.
And one of those statuses being looks.
Sure. Absolutely.
Okay. How he looks. Another one is how tall is he? How strong is he? Can he make money? Is he intelligent? Like it's like a multifaceted layer, and women kind of value them differently.
Yeah. So some might pay more attention to one than the other and stuff like
that. Yeah, but generally they're looking for status of some kind, signals of status, and that can be wealth or whatever, right? Okay. And I think that men are a lot more focused on how the woman looks.
Yes, I would agree with that. Yeah. It was interesting when you said that. The first thing I thought of was I had a conversation with someone recently that was funny because they were saying that women are quite often judged on their appearance, and it's unfortunate. And I agree completely. I think that's exactly right. But one of the other interesting things I mentioned to them was like when I was growing up, I was always pretty skinny. Like I was never a big intimidating guy. I'm still not a big intimidating guy. And men treat you differently when you're not physically intimidating.
Especially when you're short.
Yeah, they just do. I've seen it millions of times. So I was joking with one of my friends because she was saying, I was sitting in a meeting and I suggested an idea and everybody was sort of mumble. And then, Dwayne suggested the same idea a few minutes later as a slightly repackaged form, and everybody was doing the dance and saying, that's brilliant, Dwayne. She's like, that's happened to me so many times. And I laughed. I'm like, that happens to me all the time.
So many corporations would rather have Peyton Manning.
Yeah.
Run the corporation.
Yeah, no, for sure, right?
I went into this one place, and I've been lucky because in the lighting business, I get to go and see a lot of different kinds of businesses, and then my strategy is to try to get to the top guy and work my way down.
Yeah.
Right. You know how many times I'm 5'7".
Right.
Okay. Do you know how many times I've noticed that the presidents of companies are always tall dudes?
Yeah.
You know why?
Yeah.
Because they get listened to quicker.
Yep. I agree.
Like it's just a fact of life.
Yep. Men value physical presence in a certain way that means they just discount you if you don't have it.
That's right. It's like, I could kick that guy's ass. Shut up, buddy.
Yeah. Women don't have that kind of experience. So they find it quite surprising when I tell them stuff like that. They're like, really? They care about stuff like that? I'm like, oh yeah, absolutely.
Well, I'll tell you the highest form of discrimination that we can actually measure is tall on short amongst men.
Oh, really?
It's measurable. They can see it. I think it's like $10,000 an inch. In terms of height.
And how much do you make at your job?
Yeah, it's something ridiculous like that, and then it levels off at 6'1".
Well, that does it. I'm getting lifts.
Yeah, it levels off at 6'1".
Wow.
It levels off, and then there's no difference after that. You can be 7 feet tall or 6'1", but if you're 5 feet tall, you make like $60,000 less than someone who's 6 feet tall.
Right.
It's really ridiculous, actually.
That is ridiculous.
And that's not accounting for background, intelligence, race, nothing.
Wow,
It's
that's
just
wild.
tall on short. It's the most measurable. And nobody even talks about it. Like if you were to go to the
Yeah.
Human Rights Tribunal and say, gosh, I'm suing it for height discrimination, they'd look at you like you're crazy.
Yeah, absolutely.
What are you talking about, honky? You know what I'm saying?
No, for sure. No, it's interesting because
not that I care about that. I'm not.
No. But I get what you're saying, and I think I think that's another interesting thing about what happens when you bring people who are not getting along very well to the table, because you're playing a character. And that character has characteristics that are different than yours. They're less focused on you, so to speak, and they're more focused on you as your character. And I've actually watched before. I have 2 kids in my in one of my games. I'll keep it ambiguous because I don't want to single them out. They just do not get along at all. One of them, for example, will always have sort of a wink, wink, snide comment to make that isn't exactly insulting, but everybody knows at the table that it's insulting, that kind of stuff. He's always needling them. He's always baiting them and stuff like this. And the other kid...
He's very sophisticated with his insults.
Yeah, exactly. And the other kid isn't. The other kid's very, he's sort of self-focused for various different reasons. So he's always thinking about himself and talking about himself. So he doesn't really understand what's going on. But it's a sort of mild form of bullying. So I talked to the parent about it outside the game and said, look, I've been noticing that, your son's getting treated this way by a lot of the other boys in the group. Is this something you're aware of? And she's like, yeah, I am. So we had sort of a back and forth about it to get a sense of it. But one of the neat things is, so when they're sitting around before the game's starting and outside of the game, they do a lot of this. And it's pretty obvious. But when they're playing and they have to achieve a goal together, when they're playing and if their players don't cooperate, they're not going to be able to move on to the next step. It changes things. Now, not always. Some days they're just not happy with each other and it doesn't really matter what happens. But I have noticed, and I've noticed this with adults as well, that when they're playing in the game, again, because you're playing a different character, you're not yourself, some of those gut reactions that you have to other people can be a little bit different. It's almost like they're another person for a little while. And it does allow them to move past some of those issues to a degree. Whether or not that sticks, I haven't done any follow-up. Like I haven't gone to somebody after we've done something like that and said, so I've noticed. I have with my kids noticed it though. Like I've noticed I've been playing with this one group now for a year and a half. And at the beginning, it was challenging, right? Because they're also young and they're somebody else's kids, they're not mine. So, I have to be appropriate about how I handle it.
Duty of care there and how you do it.
Yeah, absolutely. And I don't want to make anybody feel the parents can look at them and say, you've done something wrong. That's not my job.
Yeah,
my job is to just facilitate through the disagreement and get us back on track again. That's what I'm supposed to be doing. But I have noticed that
you're not there to sort out the power dynamics of a group.
No, not at all. And actually, it's as a teacher, one of the things that I've learned, and I see this working pretty well, is that unless you let a group figure it out for themselves,
their hierarchy or whatever,
it never sticks. So I can come in and say, you need to do this, and you shouldn't do that, and that really wasn't appropriate, and please don't do this, and next time you do that, and that can help a little bit. But at the end of the day, I've never seen a group resolve these sorts of issues unless they do it themselves. So when my kids at the table playing D&D disagree with each other, I don't make it happen. I don't say, no, you're just going to do this, or no, that isn't right. I'm like, you guys do what you want. You figure it out. Now I moderate it a little bit, make sure it doesn't get too hot.
Make sure the rules don't get broken.
And everybody's being fair.
Yeah, that's the benevolent king.
Yeah. And I might occasionally jump in and say, well, have you guys thought about this? Or maybe there's a consequence over here you haven't considered. But for the most part, telling them what to do and saying, this is wrong and you shouldn't do it, you should do it like that, that'll work for some of them, but it's not going to work for most of them. And it won't change the group dynamic if you've got a group dynamic issue going on.
Sure.
And that's, I think, one of the things that's great about D&D is that I can sit back and say, you can do what you want. It isn't a game like, Monopoly or chess where there's only certain things you can do. It's a very open game. So if they want to try something, you can try that. Sure. Right. And it gives them the ability to sort of explore things. And I don't know, I think it works really well that way.
Why do you think humans like to play games?
Oh, that's a really good question. I've read lots of stuff on this. I don't know what the official answer would be, but because
we know that dolphins play games.
Yeah.
Chimpanzees play games. Elephants they do stuff like this.
Yeah.
Our games are just more complicated. I don't know about it's hard to say complicated because, you don't think about your digestion, but it sure is complicated.
Yeah.
So what does complicated mean? Is it like a different thing? Right. You know what I mean? But you know what I'm asking, right? Why do we do this? What are we learning when we're doing this?
There's different kinds of games, right? That's the other thing to think about. So if you and I are playing chess, for example, you're engaging parts of your brain involved in sort of limited strategic thinking and planning. You're engaged part of your brains that are talking about sort of moves within a framework, right?
Yes.
So it's all very sort of controlled and regular. And the idea here is, can I take the same set of rules that you're applying and outsmart you?
Sure.
So it's sort of very focused and stuff like that. When you're playing a board game, it's a little bit more open because there's more different kinds of things you can do. When you're playing a role-playing game, though, you're not tapping into quite the same things. So some people like RPGs because they're exciting. You know, my character almost died.
RPGs are role-playing games.
Yes, sorry.
Yeah. You have first time you said that.
No,
you
absolutely.
never know who's listening to this. Right?
And I actually should clarify, they're generally called tabletop role-playing games these days because you can also play them virtually, I guess. So they throw that in. So when you're playing an RPG, some people are doing it just for fun. They like hitting things over the head. They like, rolling the dice and the excitement associated with that. Some people are playing it for the social aspect because, and this is powerful stuff. My son and his friends, he has sort of 7 friends he talks to pretty much every day. And they online game together pretty much every day for at least some time, if not more than they should. So they interact socially that way. They talk to each other that way. So they're fully informed of what's happening in each other's lives, about what happened during their days. So any one of these kids, if I went up to my son and said, what is so-and-so doing these days? How are they doing? He could fill me in on everything. Now, as of this September, one of the parents approached me and said, we want to get a game together for the boys again because they'd stopped because of school. And she's like, we'd like them to, rather than doing what I did for years and just ran the game for them for free, we'd like them to pay for it and be part of your business. I'm like, yeah, sure. So we got the game.
That works.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm into that because I do it anyway.
I take checks.
It's my kid, right? And you get to do something with your kid. Absolutely.
Yeah,
but having said that, it was great to get some money from it.
Yeah,
so one of the things that I noticed was when they got together in person, it was different. Because they're in the room with you. It's like you were saying, I like somebody coming into the studio. There's a reason for that. People act differently when they're in each other's presence. This is what you said earlier today, right?
I'll tell you something. You could sit someone down in front of me, and we could completely disagree. Right. But when you sit down here, you turn on especially when you push record, pal.
Yeah. That changes everything.
Oh, man.
Sure does.
It's like, okay, do you know how to behave in a conversation with somebody that maybe you're going to disagree with?
Yeah.
And there's like a tension and an excitement there. And then with people, like you teach, you're in front of people a lot, but sometimes they're not, right? And sometimes you're talking to somebody and you can really feel the release when it's over.
Yeah.
And how happy they are that we've had a great conversation and that we haven't argued about anything and no one's been insulted and that we're actually friends even though we disagree.
Disagree with that stuff, yeah.
Yeah, it's such a wonderful thing, dude.
It is an important thing. I agree completely. So there's that too, I think. And the other thing, I don't know about you, but there's something very exciting about dice. I know that sounds really simplistic,
sure. No,
but absolutely. I'll give you an example for that. There's different ways to play D&D, many, many different ways, and the rule books are very explicit that you can run the game however you like. You can keep this rule, drop that rule. It's very different than a board game where you're pretty much supposed to run it as is, right? RPG or TTRPGs are like that. You're supposed to be very much more open. The way I run my game, all the dice rolls happen in front of everybody. So normally, or one way people used to run D&D quite commonly is you have a DM screen up in front of you that people can't see behind because you protect your notes. They don't know what monsters they're fighting and stuff. And you do all your rolling behind the screen and tell them what happened. I do everything out in the open.
Okay.
So I can't save your ass. There's nothing I can do to help you. So if I'm rolling the damage that this monster's going to do and you've made the decision to fight the monster and I roll enough damage to kill you, you're dead. There's no rolling behind the screen and going, oh, you only have 2 hit points left. You better get out of here. Right? Or, oh, he just missed you. I can't do that. It's right there. So there's such excitement to this stuff. It's wild.
Bet you can cut it with a knife.
Oh, absolutely.
Sure.
And been so many fun times. I remember a couple of years ago, I ran an adventure for them where there was a mountainside and they had to get up to this door that had appeared in the middle of the mountainside. And one of the party thieves decided, I'm going to climb walls to do that. Well, D&D has a lot of math in it, and you have to roll a percentage dice to see if you can climb walls, and you have to get under a certain number. And it's a pretty high number. Like he was like an 8th level thief. He had a 96% chance of climbing that wall successfully. So he was like, yeah, I can do that. So he starts climbing the wall. And the way the rules work, you roll to see if he's done it every certain amount of feet. Mm-hmm. And to get up to where he had to go, I had to roll 8 times. Mm-hmm. So rolling a 98% chance 8 times is very different than rolling it once. So we rolled the first time, he was good. We rolled the second time, he was good. Rolled the third time, he came very close. He got like a 96 or something like that. And everybody was like, whoa, okay. Then he rolled the next time. They were getting nervous at this point. They were rolling the next time. By the time he rolled that last dice, they were squealing.
Yes.
They were squealing. Is he going to make it? Because if he didn't make it, he was going to fall like 800 feet and die, right? So that is something that you cannot underestimate. Taking the dice and everything counts on how you roll right now. And if you don't do it,
but how does this work? Like, where's the biological system? I think it's that guy Piaget. You know that guy I'm talking about?
Oh, you want to like what makes us psychologically so attached to that? Or?
Yes, okay. For example, if you and I were actually climbing up a mountain,
right?
Okay.
Yeah.
Yes, I get it. Like, there's the door up there. We got to get to the top of the mountain and whatever, rock climbing or whatever. Even if you have a harness on and you're not going to die, I get the feeling of tension. Okay, I get it. But the idea that we can project this in our minds.
Okay. Now I got you. I can answer this question. It took me a second to figure out what you're getting to, but now I get it. When you're role playing, to some degree, not completely, because if it was completely, you'd have some issues we need to talk to a psychiatrist about.
Sure.
To some degree, you identify with your character. Your character is you.
Okay.
So not completely,
sure.
To some degree. So when you risk your character dying or being significantly hurt, you get very similar emotional and biochemical reactions to the ones you'd have if you were actually at risk. Not the same, obviously.
Sure.
Otherwise, people couldn't play the game. It would traumatize them, right?
Yeah, for sure.
We don't want that. But there are similarities there. So I felt that pulse increase. I felt that heartbeat increase when I'm about to shoot those dice or when I'm about to make a risky decision, right?
Sure.
And the other neat thing about it is the role-playing aspect. If you started, let's say you and I rolled up a character and played right today, you might have a bit of identification with it because, he was a little bit like a fantasy hero that you liked, and so you felt...
Sure, I'll be Aragorn, son of Arathorn.
Yeah, exactly. So that might give you a bit of a
Legolas, right.
But let's say you and I created a character and then met once a week for the next 5 years, and that character lived for 2 or 3 of those years. You get very invested in a character that's been around that long. You have shared past experiences.
And can he die in the game?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah.
So this is, I think that's where people kind of get their suicide fears from.
Sure. Now,
because that could be devastating to somebody.
Yeah. Although
I'm not saying it's no, but I mean, I see what you're saying, and now the game becomes really meaningful.
The term they call this, the technical term for this is bleed, if I'm remembering it correctly. What it is that something that happens in the game can bleed out into your regular day-to-day life. So let's say you and I were playing characters in the game, and
even if you read a good book, or you or whatever. For example, I'm not a big TV watcher or series watcher. I'm not into Game of Thrones. I'm for kids. I'm a pretty busy guy. I like watching UFC for the drama. I like watching men fight in a cage.
Yeah.
Okay, but
no
I mean, I would have loved to got in a cage when I was younger, bro.
Oh, really? Okay.
Yeah.
That was never me. No?
For sure.
I'm happy to see it.
You know what, man? If you had said you get to fight guys that are your weight.
Oh, yeah?
I would have loved to do
all
that.
Over it?
Yeah,
right
yeah.
On.
So that, whatever it is, right? But, I mean, but you see, I watched this one show. It wasn't Breaking Bad. I watched a little bit of that, but I watched this one, Prison Break.
Yes.
Okay? I watched Prison Break, the first 3... That's it, Prison Break. Yeah. The first 3 things, or the 4 seasons, and I watched them all. Okay, and I'm talking 10 years ago now or something like this, right? And man, I was sad when it ended.
Yeah. I've had that experience.
I was sad. I really felt sad, and I think people can really care about a make-believe character.
Oh, absolutely, they can. So to address what you're talking about, particularly with kids, there's a few things you need to do to sort of make that work. So I'll give you an example from my Thursday night game. When I start the kids off at the beginning of the campaign or the beginning of the year when they get introduced to the program, we have what they call in the business a session 0, which is where you sit down and say, here's how we play, here are our rules, here are the expectations. And it's important for a whole bunch of reasons. It's important, for example, that in D&D, there's multiple pantheons of gods. So there's Greek gods and Egyptian gods and Chinese gods. Some parents might not be comfortable with their kids playing in a game like that. So you have to
Thor, Zeus,
exactly. So you might want to. So I tell them about stuff like that. But one of the things you talk about in session 0 that I think is very important is essentially the lethality of the game. So you need to understand that if you create a character in this game, there's a very good chance, I do the thing they used to do back in engineering, which is look to your left, look to your right. Somebody's not going to be here next term. No, exactly. Yeah. So I look at them and I say, look to your left, look to your right. Somebody's going to probably be dead by the end of the sessions.
Sure.
So as long as they understand that's a real meaningful consequence and it can happen, and when it does happen, what I find kids do, which is fun, I can't speak as much for adults because I haven't done long-term campaigning with adults in a long time. But kids,
so you're doing like a season of playing.
Yeah, like a whole. So you're playing, so they get a chance to get really invested in the character and in the role-playing of it. Kids react interestingly to this. They get jazzed up about how spectacular the death is. So, did you see how he went out? Oh, it was awesome and stuff like this, right? And then they immediately get excited about making the next character that they get to make when they're coming back into the game because almost always there's going to be stuff about your character you like and stuff about your character you don't. So after playing a character for months and months and months, you might want to try something new.
Sure.
Right? So I found that for the most part, I've had no negative experiences with having death in the game when kids are playing it, as long as they know ahead of time that this is what the risk is. The other safety valve you have is that this is a game with magic in it, and there are mechanisms to bring people back from the dead. So just to give you a current example, in my Thursday night game, one of the players plays what's called a druid. It's basically a nature priest. And he was also an insect nature priest. He was a big walking humanoid insect nature priest. Anyway, he died in an encounter. The dice weren't too kind, and he didn't make the best decisions, which happens. And he was upset. He didn't want to be dead. He wanted to keep playing his character. And I was like, well, you do have options if you want to bring your characters back from the dead in D&D, but it's a bit involved. And so they talked as a group, and it was interesting to watch how empathetic the other kids were, because they realized that he was upset about this and he didn't want to lose his character. And they realized that taking on the responsibility of bringing him back, you basically go to a temple, you give them either a huge donation of gold or you do something for them, and then one of the senior priests casts a high-level resurrection spell and brings them back from the dead. But because it's such a big thing for them to do, they asked them for a big favor in response. So all the group was going to be taking on this huge commitment in order to help out this other kid bring back his character. And they talked about it for about half an hour in session, and the pros and the cons, whether we should do this, how you feel about it. And at the end of the day, he said, no, I want to try to do this. Would you guys help me out? And they all said yes. So they took on this major quest that has now occupied us for 3 months. They're still not done, and they've had a lot of challenges associated with it. I don't know if they'll finish it or not. I don't know if they can, because it's really hard. Having said that, they took this on because this other boy decided that, no, I'm not comfortable with that. And that's what I think is important to realize about things like RPGs. They're very flexible open systems. So because I'm the DM and I get to decide what happens.
DM is?
The Dungeon Master. Because I'm the guy running the game.
Okay.
If I want to, and if that kid says, no, I really want to bring my character back, we can make that happen. The key is to make it something that's challenging and interesting, not just you're back, like a video game, right? Give it a cost. There's a lot of, one of the things I find a lot of people have trouble doing is managing the costs and the opportunity costs of the things they don't do, et cetera, et cetera. It's a hard thing to do. D&D is a resource management game. You have to make decisions based on how much of a challenge this is going to be, what you're going to have to give up to do it, and things like that. It's hard. It's dangerous. It's difficult. I think that's a great environment to teach people about planning, right? About getting things organized before you go in, about whether or not you should really be doing this. Is this really the right decision? There's neat mechanisms in the game like encounter reaction rules and parlay rules. So if you're coming up to somebody who's about to fight you and you start talking to them, the rules in D&D say at that point you have to roll the dice to see how they react to what you say. So if you come up to
there's a rule of parlay.
Yeah, exactly what it is. And the neat thing is the rules ask you to do that. So sometimes the reaction is negative. So the group of bandits that you run into has a negative reaction. They take out their swords and we get into it. Sometimes the reaction's neutral. So then you can play that in various ways. Every once in a while, though, you get something called an enthusiastically positive result, which means the dice have landed in such a way that that bandit leader has decided he likes you guys.
Hey!
So I've had this happen a couple of times, and it's so much fun to watch how it reacts, because the players were expecting one thing to happen, something else entirely different happens. So the game's got enough of those sorts of mechanisms in it that it really keeps, if you let the dice stand, if you roll them and see what they say and then say, oh, okay, I got to make this make sense. I got to make this work. Because that random element is in the game, it keeps it really interesting. They're constantly getting challenged, having different things thrown at them, and you can't really predict where it's going to go. It's fun.
Have you ever heard of Carl Jung?
Yep.
So I think
don't know him incredibly well, but I've read bits and pieces. Yeah.
Yeah, and I mean, I've only read summaries. Like every time I try to pick up that kind of stuff, I go, "Not for me." I'm not, if I was in academia, like it was funny because I studied English lit and classical mythology and kind of like a little bit of art history and that sort of stuff. And I could have gone like on the learn Latin or ancient Greek route. Like it was open there. Like that was open to Sophocles. I took a course on Greek tragedies and stuff like that. Right. And I could have gone that way. Like I had I was a good essayist. Bad exam taker, good essayist.
I'm with you on that, actually. I'm the same on both of those.
Yeah, I mean,
are not my strong suit.
Yeah, actually, I really like to write essays. I enjoy it. I like to come up with a thesis and unpack it
and develop an extended argument.
I enjoy it. This is why I like to do this, right? Yeah. And I like to be with people that I can talk about these ideas with.
Yeah. Oh, you would have liked grad school for that, man. That's exactly what it was.
Yeah, I didn't. I dropped out though, unfortunately.
But you know what? You might have made the better decision.
Yeah, maybe. Selling light bulbs has been good to me. But there's like there's meta stories going on here.
Yeah.
There's like this like you have to act it out correctly. You have to take your place in the world humbly.
Right.
Accept the chance. Make
Yep.
your decisions. And then if your character doesn't flow with some sort of the archetypal organs of your mind, your meta stories, the game doesn't feel right or something. Like you can't be if you're a coward, you have to be a coward in a
Right.
sense, right? You have to
Yeah.
play the Judas role, right? Am I right about this?
Yeah, no,
in a
absolutely.
way,
I think people
the
invent their own
Judas can't
narratives
be
for
the
this stuff.
hero of
Yeah.
the story or something. It doesn't make
Yeah.
sense to people.
I think what happens too is that you get some groups are more about the gaming aspect. There's another classical division, and I've read a little bit of gaming theories. A classical division between people that play TTRPGs because they want to play
TTR, what's that?
tabletop role-playing
Oh,
games. Yeah.
sorry. Now
That's all good.
you're giving you're extending
So I'm
those
throwing it out again.
acronyms on me, man.
sorry. So people who play the tabletop role-playing games, some people play them because they want to play the game. They want to play a game,
Right.
and it's just this game they're playing.
And it's entertaining.
Yeah, it's entertaining. So the idea here is that, and this is quite common, there's a division between old school Dungeons & Dragons and sort of current Dungeons & Dragons, and most of it's fluff. But one interesting and important distinction is that old school games challenge the player, new school games challenge the character. So in a new school game, what the DM's trying to do, what the Dungeon Master's trying to do is say, here's what's on your sheet, here's what your character can do. I want to make this scenario to challenge your stats, your magic items, your spells, the things you have as a character. Old school Dungeon Masters want to challenge the player. I want to challenge you, your ability to think and figure out problems, your ability to make decisions. I want to make more about what you do than what your sheet does, right? And I think that's challenging the person directly is one kind of fun. Challenging the character is different. So when you're challenging the character, you want to build the best character you can build and watch how good they can be. So it's a video gamey kind of mentality, right?
Sure.
You want to build your...
I got the biggest gun. I got the armor. I got the most health. Whatever.
So therefore I can do the best, right? And that's one way. It's sort of a wish fulfillment kind of thing. Let's beef it up, get all the stuff, and go out there and kick some ass, right?
Yeah, sure.
The first one is more of a gaming kind of thing. It's a challenge. Can I beat the puzzle? Can I figure this out? Can I do that? So you can run the game in different ways. You can run the game so my son and his friends have shifted over the last, well, they've been doing it now for 6 years. They've shifted over the last 6 years. When they first started, they were totally into the builds. They wanted to make the best character they could with the best, neatest powers and all this kind of stuff. But the problem is, because D&D is so deadly and open-ended, it doesn't respect that kind of stuff. You can have the best stats in the world. You can still die pretty quickly in a lot of different ways. So they shifted their gaming style to be more, they want to figure it out the best way possible. They want to get through that adventure with the least amount of casualties. They want to game the system and figure it out. They want to do better. They want to be challenged. They want to win. So it's a shift in focus in how you play. And I find that for a lot of people, that can be very engaging. That can be the kind of thing you really like. You don't get challenged like that in the real world in an environment where if you lose, you're not losing your job, you're not losing your life, you're only losing something else. So it's a great sort of medium level version of taking a real challenge in the real world and overcoming it, or doing something totally virtual with no consequences. It's something in between.
Sure.
And I think that's really
because the emotional consequences are real, is what you're saying.
Yeah, they can be.
You feel like
yeah.
You know, it's interesting. So the one game you're taught, the new school, or you're an old school guy for sure, right?
Yeah, absolutely. I don't have any problem with any version of the game at all. I just want to say that because
but you prefer. It's a preference.
Yeah, it's also familiarity. I played the game all my life, and
come on, it's a preference.
Oh, sure it is. Yeah, it's both. I wouldn't have played it all my life if I didn't enjoy it, right? But having said that, I've got such a massive amount of experience with this particular edition of D&D that I can walk into a room with nothing and just play.
So the imagination can go two ways, right? So you can say, I would like to be a god. I want to be as strong as possible. I want to be able to defeat all foes, right? And and I'm going to build my my defenses and my intellect and whatever I need to be.
Get that?
Yeah. But what is the all powerful God? He's omnipresent, omnipotent, all this stuff, right? He's everywhere all the time, strong as heck, can do whatever he wants. What does he lack?
Well, sometimes love.
No.
Sometimes
limitations.
Yeah, and they come to crave that. Yeah.
And so, as they come through, they're like, wow, I can be whatever I want. I can be like unto God, and There's that temptation. But as you mature into the game, I think what you see is that it's more interesting and more realistic and more a modeling of these meta stories to intrinsically have limitations.
Yeah. The one way I've heard it said before is that when you succeed at a task in D&D, because you don't win or lose D&D. That's the other thing, right? There's no point at which you go, oh, you won. like you would with a game of chess or something like that. But when you achieve a task, when you beat a challenge and something like that, you feel like you've earned it. And I think that's the big thing that comes from
in the classical or in both.
Oh, I think it can be in any system. You can do that in the newer systems as well. It depends on how you run the game, and that can be run in any system you want. But I think the philosophy about it, the attitude towards it, this idea that I want to challenge you such that when we come out of this, the guy who created the game. Well, there's a little controversy about this, but the guy whose name is on all the first edition books and is well known as a guy named Gary Gygax, and he didn't actually start the first D&D campaign. That was started by a guy named Dave Arneson.
Has he been accused of being a Satanist?
Yes.
Okay, good. Just wanted to check that box real quick for all the people listening.
So Gygax had this thing where...
Gygax sounds like Satan.
Yeah, it does, doesn't it? Rearrange the letters. I'm telling you, there's a message there.
Spell it backwards.
Gygax had this idea that the best and most exciting kind of gaming was what he would call adversarial. The idea is that the DM is out to get you and you've got to survive. Okay. Now, that can work in certain contexts. It can also be horribly unpleasant if the guy running the game is a jerk.
Yeah,
right?
Sure.
And I've seen that. Everybody who's played the game has played with a DM who's just a jackass and who's out to sort of flex their muscles and say, do what you want, I can take you. You know what I mean? It's that kind of business. But there is something to be said for a adversarial approach to running a game, for the role of the Dungeon Master being, I want to challenge you. I'll make this hard for you. I don't want it to be obvious what the solutions are. I want you to have to think about this and work on it and cooperate together to get it done. And once you find that zone where you're challenging your players on a regular basis and they have to work to make it happen, the satisfaction in that is amazing. I have noticed things like my kids, like my son and his friends, will talk about when they had this bad teacher at school or when they had this crazy experience where their friend knocked over the motorbike by mistake, but they always talk about the times their characters did stuff. Years later. Do you remember the time, Angus, when you did that? Yeah. Angus is Angus. I shouldn't have mentioned a name there. I apologize.
Leah, John, Paul, Ellen, Kira. There's
Angus is our resident jackass. He will do whatever the craziest thing is to see what will happen, right? And he's done stuff in the game that the guys still talk about. They still joke about with each other. So I think there's a real niche for kids particularly, but also for adults in our society, for an environment where with somebody running the game, so you can keep an eye out for markers that, you know what, I don't think they're very happy right now, or you know what, this isn't working for so-and-so. So not just a machine or a video game that doesn't do that. I can read my players if I sit at a table with you for hours and hours and hours, I see you. I see how you react to things. I've noticed, for example, I know I can play poker with any of my D&D kids. Sure. Because I can see their tells. You know what I mean? So once in an environment where you can kind of keep an eye on that and make sure that no one's having a hard time, but give them that sort of visceral excitement of challenging somebody they somehow identify with to a certain degree and take real risks associated with it. You know, you roll those dice, what happens, man. We have a dice box. If it's that's everybody at my table knows. Once it's in the box, we're done. I'm not changing it for you. I'm not helping you out. So in that kind of environment, how many times can you do that without any real risk of, bodily harm or legal consequences or anything like that? It's a rare thing to get. So
it's a great thing to practice.
Yeah. And it's a great venue to practice it in.
Yes. Because as an entrepreneur, like we're doing it for real.
Yeah. But there's no consequences to that, right?
Yeah. And the consequences are emotional, but they're also financial. They're also, there's all sorts of problems that can come up.
Legal. You can accidentally do stuff you didn't realize you weren't supposed to be doing. Right?
Yeah. Like, I mean, and if you think it's any different than a dice roll, man, you don't know what you're talking about, because I've started 6 businesses, 5 for 6. They've all made money. Okay. To a certain extent. And 2, 3 are very profitable.
Nice.
Right? I mean, in terms of percentages, I'm still a normal guy. I mean, I'm not, I wish.
I know what you mean.
You know what I mean? But I've been able to create something that was self-sustaining.
Right.
It sustained itself, and I left it and still goes.
Nice.
You know what I mean? And I just look at it, I built that. It's fun, cool. Right? Yeah. But I mean, if people listening to this, if they don't think that's exactly like rolling the dice, that's exactly what it is, man. Because you're spending your time there, you're making decisions, you're coming to crossroads, you're taking chances.
And sometimes things happen that aren't going to help you, and you just have to roll through it and figure it out.
Sure. Yeah. And sometimes things happen that destroy you.
Yeah.
Financially.
Yeah.
I've come pretty close on a couple occasions to you trust people and they screw up.
Yeah. For sure. And you think that
or they steal from you.
Oh. Hard.
I mean, like, hey, man, if you don't think that, it's funny, Scott and I were talking about this last night. it's like, you ever, I don't know if this is going to apply or not, but I think it does apply to Dungeons and Dragons because it gets people into that mind space. Scott, who's the producer of the show, folks, and also a pretty smart guy. I think he's into Dungeons and Dragons too. But we were talking about how I don't like ever heard the expression, if it doesn't kill you, it makes you stronger?
Yeah.
I don't like that expression.
Right.
And I think it's a bad expression because, and then I was talking to Scott about it and he said, yeah, because it gives credit to your abuser.
Right. Yeah.
In a way, right?
Like you somehow should be thankful because
Yeah.
they put you through this tough experience and you came out with a positive.
Yeah.
So
I
they did it for you.
Yeah.
No, I know. I've actually had this exact same argument with people before because I think that trauma can very much change who you are at the end of the day into a positive thing, right? So
there is post-traumatic strength that can come from things, right?
But it doesn't mean it's a pleasurable process, or B, there might not be non-traumatic ways to get to that result.
Or it doesn't mean
right?
that you're stronger, dude.
Yeah.
Like, you could be weaker.
Yeah, absolutely.
And you're definitely different.
Yeah.
And your life, you probably prefer that it never happened. And this idea that we were saying that people that say that with a straight face, it's one thing to say that, like, and kind of snicker a little bit and laugh and maybe give someone a wink. Yeah, you're going to make it, man. You know what I mean? It's another thing to say it with a straight face. When you say that with a straight face, it means you've never encountered true malevolence in your life.
Yeah, or you've never hit a barrier you couldn't get around or push
Oh, no,
past
just,
or
no,
whatever.
evil when, it's like the idea. I had another guy I was talking to, he kept talking about intentions. Like, he wanted to make sure his intentions were correct.
Right.
And I thought about that for a while. It's like, you ever, have someone hurt you and then approach them about it and they say to you, wasn't my intention?
Yeah.
Okay. Mm-hmm. Have you ever had someone say it was my intention?
Not often.
Right?
Yeah.
But I would bet that it often is, man.
Oh, I bet it is often. Yeah. Yeah, for sure. But no one's going to say that, right?
Yeah, but it's like, if you're running around saying like, things like, what doesn't hurt you makes you stronger, or what doesn't kill you makes you stronger. I don't think you've encountered or realized that there's truly malevolent people. I think Dungeons and Dragons, like taking on these role-playing games, allows us to go to a safe place and explore those things.
Yeah, absolutely. It gets quite engaged. One of the things, again, Twitter has its positives and its negatives. But having said that, I spend time on it to get sort of a sense of what people in the gaming community are interested in. And now, because people are becoming more self-conscious about things like race and gender, they're talking about how the game represents things like race and gender, and does it do so in a positive way or a negative way.
Think about Lord of the Rings.
Yeah.
Dark is bad.
Yeah.
White is good.
Yeah, no, absolutely. That's one of the most fundamental things that started off this kind of discussion, was people looking and saying, okay, now that we've accepted that various forms of media can exemplify our beliefs and our ideas and reflect certain things about the world, how do we feel about the fact that D&D uses things like orcs and orcs historically, as you're saying, some people associate. It's ambiguous as to whether that's what Tolkien wanted. If you actually look at the literature on this, it suggests that he thought of orcs as being Asian and Mongolian people, not black people, in his representation. In his head.
I think that there's a Mongol horde element.
Yeah, that's exactly what it was.
To the Sauron forces, like the horde.
That's how he felt about it too.
Yeah.
So drawing.
But I don't know. I don't know if we can start putting a race. I mean, those are beautiful stories, man.
Oh, for sure. And I think it's important to contextualize it to the time and when he lived and stuff like that.
I want to throw something at you here. Yeah. And Scott and I have talked about this a couple times. I've been trying to unpack this for a while since I started the show, because there's some things I want to figure out.
Okay.
And and one of them is the race issue.
Yes.
Okay.
Right.
And so I've come to believe, so I've talked to, I've had a bunch of podcasts that we had to be deleted. I've talked to people about white privilege and some, and these types of issues. And, I wonder about these words and these labels in one context, and then you want to take them into real life. So I look at the idea of racism, for example. Right. Mm-hmm. Now, first of all, looking at the world from a racial perspective is actually a benign thing to do, first of all.
Sure. Because
you can say, how do we help young black people in the ghetto?
Right.
That's a fair thing to say.
Sure.
It's in a racial context, right? Mm-hmm. But the reality is, for me, is that I think racism is better compared to autism as a spectrum that everybody finds themselves on.
Oh, so okay, got it. Yeah.
You see what I'm saying?
Yeah, I do.
So if you have a KKK supreme leader or whatever the hell that guy is called, dragon guy or whatever at this end, okay? And then down here you got I don't know, I don't know what I don't even know who's at the other end. But let's say this is 0 and this is 10.
Sure.
Okay. I don't think there's anybody that's here.
Right.
You understand what I mean?
Yep. I think everybody has some degree of
let's say like
yeah.
a 2 is like wanting to live in a white community.
Right.
Primarily white community.
Right.
And at which point on this spectrum do you fall into the ethically moral dilemma?
So at what point does it become?
What point does it become public business?
Okay. Sure.
Listen, like there clearly, if you drive around this neighborhood, Asians like to live in the same area.
Yeah. Oh, for sure. There's Toronto's
right.
neat
Go
that
down
way,
to
right?
the beaches.
Yeah, yeah.
Okay.
You'll notice various groups live in various places. No, for sure. Yeah, yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
So at what point, where on this spectrum do we draw the ethical quandary line?
Okay.
Where on the spectrum do we draw the moral quandary? Because those
The
two things
legal
are,
line,
and then the legal line.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Well, that's a very big question, but
I know, but I think Dungeons and Dragons help us think about this sort of stuff in a way.
You certainly could. I think for me, the line gets drawn at a point. Well, there's a couple of different things where you're actively promoting things that are negative for groups of people. So it's one thing for me to personally believe something that's negative about a group of people. It's another thing for me to go out and tell other people about it and encourage them to act on it in some way, right? I think that's a point at which you have to say, okay, wait a minute, this is a little different. This isn't just you having a dissenting view to somebody else. This is you actively
promoting
violence or hate. And it doesn't just have to be it doesn't just have to be physical violence, right? It can be other things as well. I think you step in and you have to do something about it when it involves things like labor laws. So let's say there's an employment equity law in place and somebody comes in and says, well, I don't like that employment equity law because I don't think it's fair, right? If you want to press as to what they think is unfair about it, right? I've had these conversations with people in my class all the time because sooner or later, somebody will say, well, things like employment equity laws are unfair because they're biased against white people. I'm like, all right, let's talk this through. Why do you think they're biased against white people? And they'll say, well, because if I'm a white guy and I'm competing for a job and there's a black woman over here and she's competing for the job, they're going to give the job to her. I'm like, well, first of all, that's factually incorrect. That's not how employment equity works at all. So let's talk about how it works.
Sure.
Employment equity is quite simple. If you have 5 candidates that are shortlisted for a job and all are more or less equally qualified for the position, you don't hire the white guy. You hire somebody else. Why? Because if you look at the statistics and you look at the demographics, in businesses, particularly positions of power and more influence and stuff like that, it's predominantly white. I work in the university system. The university system has had meaningful on-the-books employment equity since, I believe, the 1960s. And still, the majority of profs are white males. So they've had how many years? 50 years of employment equity working? And it's still not the case that you have equal representation across the board. That suggests that there's some pretty serious, structural issues, social issues going on that are reinforcing. I think there's other. I think you got to separate. I think the gender issue should go over in one corner. Sure. I just threw that out. I wasn't meaning.
Right? No. Because I think that one of the and I think that the race issue goes in another corner, and they can't be handled the same way.
Of course not. You're entirely right. They interrelate. Sometimes they're similar, sometimes they're not.
Yes.
So of course they have to be separated. Yeah, I totally agree with that.
I think that there's another thing, the lifestyle issue. Okay. For me, I think the problem is that with the lifestyle issue is that my company, the one I run, we have a very opposite to the typical millennial software development firm with we do your laundry and there's a ping pong table and the axe throwing on Tuesday.
Got it.
Right?
Yeah.
So there's different cultures out there. So for me, lifestyle is not an issue because we're not pressing interaction outside of work.
Understand. Yeah. You're here to do a job, but outside of work you're on your own.
Yeah. Your life is your life, and nobody's asking you, everyone's invited to contribute in polite and meaningful ways.
Yeah.
And then I draw a line if I think it's going too far, and we're not going down this road, right? Whereas I think other workplaces are trying to be everything.
Right. Yeah. They're trying to do other things.
Yes.
Yeah. Well,
it's like that. That's my concern. It's like, so with the lifestyle one, it's like, do we all have to share our politics to sell light bulbs?
Right. Yeah. Well, you know what? Here's the challenge. I agree with you, and about a lot of this because in an academic environment, we talk about this stuff because we kind of have to.
Because you're academics.
Because we're supposed to. That's why we're there. We're there to create a space where it is possible to talk about this stuff. So I can get the argument that maybe that's not something that can be discussed elsewhere. I think where it gets challenged and where it gets difficult is when you're dealing with stuff that impacts particular groups more than others. Or groups that are traditionally marginalized or whatever the case might be. That's where, and I had to learn that myself, sort of going through the work system and even playing games with other, like when I play D&D or when I run D&D games at the after school programs, it's not just people like me. Right? There's people from different cultures there. I had to sort of re-engage with a lot of these issues when I was doing it that way because I'm playing with kids. I want to make sure I'm not...
you could have a Tamil kid with a kid from Syria, a Syrian refugee family.
Yeah.
You could have in Toronto, you could have anything.
So you want to be...
most people don't understand how diverse Toronto is. It's
absolutely,
it's a very diverse city.
It's a very diverse place. So you want to make sure to be respectful of that and to not make anybody feel uncomfortable for who they are and where they are. Because like you were saying before, you can be the one white guy in the room, and that's a weird experience. And I can imagine it's a weird experience when you're sitting at a table full of people if you happen to be the one kid that's not like everybody else, right? So you want to be sensitive to that. So that's the only caveat I put on it. I think work things should stay work things. I agree with you, but I think there are cases where, because of the issues that are being faced by various kinds of people, you do have to be a little bit more. I draw a lot, like students come to me and I have a funny thing going on with my students. If they come to me and ask me for an extension for more time, it always starts like this. Okay, sir, this thing is happening. And I immediately say, stop. I have no need to know anything about your personal life.
Yeah, sure.
I have no need to know, as much as I could be here for you.
I know exactly what you're talking about.
But all I need to know is, what do you need?
Exactly.
Tell me what you need. I'll let you know whether or not it can happen. And if it can't, we'll figure out another solution. But I don't want to know why.
Because you know what? It's the same thing as a boss, as a manager, okay? Keep the excuses to yourself. Your dog ate your homework. The bus stop died. The snowstorm happened. Whatever. You know what?
Let's just solve the problem.
Exactly.
Yeah. But there's an important reason why I do this, not just around getting the problem solved, because I think that's the best way to solve the problem, not getting mired in that stuff.
Well, you don't get stuck in a position of unfairness.
Thank you. This is where I was going with it, is that as a teacher, I'm often going to be called, students ask me for things. Can I have more time? Can I do this? Can I do that? And if it's just up to me to judge what's happened to them and make a decision, then I'm doing that. And I don't want to be the guy that's judging whether or not it's important. Because I'll give you a quick practical example. I'm at York University, and in order for you to get an exemption in a class from writing something because of a family trauma, you have to produce evidence of that. So one way that can happen is you can lose a loved one. And I'm pretty sure there's been the occasional student over the years I've taught for 18 years that said my dad died when their dad probably didn't actually die. I'm sure that happens.
Yes.
But I had a kid come to me, a young man, come to me on one occasion saying his father had passed away. And then he handed me the death certificate for his dad to prove to me that his father was dead. And I'm like, oh no. Oh my God. I felt like the worst human being in the world, right?
Sure.
I knew why that had to happen. It had to happen for bureaucratic administrative reasons, because that kid, that young man, could have been, snowing me and getting out of doing the stuff he needs to do. So there's a reason for the documentation. Don't blame anybody for asking for it. But wow, did that feel wrong? You know what I mean?
For sure.
So I think that's part of the process too, is realizing you're dealing with other human beings that have stuff going on. And me not wanting to know the details is not because I don't care, because I don't want to be judging you in any way. I don't want to be judging you on why. I don't want to look at you and say, well, do you really need more time given that that's what happened? No.
Yeah,
I just want to make it work, get the product from you, grade it, and give you a grade for the class.
Yeah,
right?
you know what's interesting about that is the larger the business or the institution, the better equipped they are to handle these issues.
Right. They have more procedures in place, more experience.
So the death certificate doesn't get handed to Ian. It goes in an envelope over to HR or whatever, right? You know what I mean? It's like those are the folks that deal with that. You and I, we can just stick to the facts here. You're going to be a week late or whatever it is, and
it's interesting though that big institutions too. I'm a bit of a labor law guy or labor history guy, and big institutions get into this situation where if they have a lot of casualized labor, like me, like part-time workers, they allow part-time workers to take on responsibility for things so they don't have to own it. So the last time York had a strike, and York has a strike basically every 2 years, like clockwork, because they have a very strong and activist union. The last time York went on strike, we were not given any meaningful guidance as to how to deal with the fact that the strike lasted for months.
Yeah, that one was like a year or something.
It was like a couple of months. It was ridiculously long, longest strike in Canadian history. And they were having students coming back to class after that. Now, these are some students you take away a month of schooling, they can handle that. Yeah. Some students you take away a month of schooling, they cannot handle that.
Sure,
they don't have the capacity. They're not organized enough. They don't know what they're doing, all this kind of stuff. So they arrive on our doorstep. And our instructions were, just give them whatever accommodations you think are appropriate. Now, some people are like, that's great. You can do whatever you want. I'm like, no, that's not great. That means I have to be the individual arbiter for probably 200 students coming to me and saying what they need.
Yeah.
And then I'm like, no, I want...
Guidelines would be better.
Yeah, I would like an institution to say, no, these are what this is what you can do, this is what you can't do. But
that's a little bit of dumping, actually.
Oh, it's absolutely a dumping. It's that the institution doesn't want to own the stuff. They're like, well, just let the course instructors handle that.
Yeah,
right?
that's it's interesting. It's like a high school saying we let our teachers individually decide the disciplinary policy. Yeah. It's like I call the school. I'm like, really?
Yeah, you're just leaving them completely naked on the field.
The teacher's trying to teach, bro.
Yeah. Yeah, and now you're adding that to their plate.
Yeah, now they have to think about what they're doing.
Why not have a prescriptive set of rules and the ability to sit down and negotiate changes if necessary, right? So
exactly. Everybody enforces them.
Yeah, so if the teacher notices or the employer notices that this rule is producing these negative results, then you revisit the rule and you talk about it. But having the rules there, I think, is super important. Yeah.
Whew, so I got a couple notes here. I could see how Dungeons and Dragons, whether it's kids or businesses or whoever's hiring you to do this, I can see how it can become a great way to model conflict resolution.
Oh, absolutely. Yes. Yeah, for sure. One of the things that you realize after encountering enough group challenges like this, where you have a whole bunch of different people that have to do things, is that sometimes the groups start off by disagreeing as to what they should be doing. Right. Mm-hmm. But again, because it's a modeled environment where there aren't, real world employment or health consequences associated with it, they can run different scenarios, get different results, and learn from it. Mm-hmm. So there's thousands of examples of this for my kids playing because they're all new to the game and they learn as they go. So one of the things they learned very early was, I mentioned this a little earlier, is if you can talk with your opponent, then you have a chance of avoiding the possibility of a deadly encounter. Now, when they first started playing, they didn't do that.
They fight right away.
They just fought everything they found. And, there's a lot of fun in that. There's nothing wrong with that. You can play D&D like that for all your life and have a perfectly good time. There's nothing wrong with it at all. Sure. Having said that, after a while, they got tired of the fact that, someone was either dying or they couldn't achieve their goals. They weren't getting anywhere. And I remember the moment with my Thursday group when this coalesced in the session, where one of them just slammed his pencil down. He's like, we never get anything done. And I was like, I could have stopped them, said, calm down, son. What are you doing? I let them go. And they were yelling at each other and blaming each other for stuff and kicking the table and all the, you did this. And then after the smoke cleared and stuff like this, and we sat down and talked, I'm like, so do you guys come to any conclusions as to what the problem might be? And they all sort of looked at me and they knew exactly what the problem was, right? They all wanted to be the one that killed the monster. They all wanted to be the one that got the job done. So they were, tripping over themselves to start fights in order to be the one to win. Sure. I'm like, so stop doing that.
Yeah.
Think about it first. Ask a question. Do this instead. And the next week they came back and they were a little edgy at first because they'd had a big fight and stuff like that. But you know what? It all rolled out nicely, and now they're playing differently and enjoying it more. There's a real skill progression to games that people forget about. They think games are just entertainment. You just want to have fun, and they can be. TV's like that too. You can just sit and watch TV and have fun. But games have the potential not only to have fun, but to build and grow and get better at the game. And that in itself is exciting. I've seen how my kids started off not doing very well. Now they're doing a lot better, and they really enjoy being skilled at something, right?
Yep.
Video games can do that. They can absolutely do that. You can build skill at a video game. But our TTRPGs, tabletop role-playing games, are great for this because there's a real learning curve involved. And by the time you're done, if you've paid attention, you'll remember stuff and go, oh yeah, the last time we did that, that didn't work out so well. Let's try this instead, right? What great skill is that to teach kids that you can learn if you apply yourself and keep trying stuff and, and work well with others?
Well, that's it. Basically, it's like it's being an entrepreneur, right?
Yeah.
It's the same thing.
It's a laundry list of skills to do well at everything, right?
Yeah, like you start off and you think, oh, this is really easy. And then you pull the card that, client defaults on invoice.
Yeah.
What happens now?
What happens now? Yeah.
Right? And you're like, okay, we go to court.
Yeah.
Or walk away. Or try to collect, or, you have these different options you can choose, and each of them take time and effort. And do you want to waste your resources there? Or do you want to move on to the next
opportunity cost, right?
Right? And it's like, CRA audit. Pull that card, right?
Man.
You know what
Don't
I'm
go
saying?
there.
You know what, man? Listen, keep a clean set of books. That's what I would say.
Oh, I've been audited twice. It went fine.
You know what? For my perspective, I don't have any. And I'm not saying this because I don't want to get audited. Come on down anytime you want, boy. They're all in apple pie order. Everything's paid. But I mean, they got a job to do, those guys, right?
Of course.
And we have to make sure we people pay their taxes, actually. Yeah. But I mean, you pull these same kind of cards, and I love the fact that, like the people, I think that humans have done this for a long time. whether, games and dice and these types of things and modeling that kind of stuff out has been around for a while. Role models, that's another one I wrote down here. I think we're all playing a role here, Ian. Even in the podcast studio, in life, as a teacher, you're playing that game out, and it's interesting because I think the game does extend into the real world. I think when you're playing Dungeons, a game like Dungeons and Dragons, I've never played, but now just watching and listening to you talk about it, what you're doing is you're saying life can be like this, or it can be like this. It can be glorious. It can be sad. It can be challenging. It can be impossible to overcome.
Yep.
And you can get unlucky, and you can get lucky, and you can parlay, or you can fight. And you don't always get to choose, but you got to act.
It's interesting that when you say like roles and exemplifying roles, one of the things that I've also noticed is that there's almost every group I've ever run, there's been at least one member, sometimes two, but one player that's a rules junkie. They want to know everything. They want to know how it works. The noses are always in the books. And my rule is that every book in the game is available to my players at any time, except the monster book for the monster they're currently fighting. You can't be reading up the stats on the thing you're fighting. That's not cool. Yeah. But other than that, anything in the game because I want them to learn how to play themselves without me around. Right? That's the goal. The goal is to hand it off so one day they can run games for their friends. And right now, I have about half of my players in all my sessions run games at home that they didn't when they started playing because I'm open about the rules and stuff like that. But people who know the rules really well, it's interesting because one of the terms for people like this in D&D is rules lawyers. Guys that'll come in and say, well, wait a minute, doesn't the rule actually say this? And can you really do that? And, I think I should be able to do this. And, there's a lot of negative press associated with people like that. Having said that, one of the things that you notice after playing for a while is people come to appreciate that. And it works that way in the job, too. There's usually somebody in the office that knows everything or a lot of what's going on. And they can be annoying because they correct you a lot and all this kind of stuff. But when that person remembers the thing that allows you to kill the monster, suddenly you're like, oh, yeah, I like Fred. Fred actually knows what's going on. You do sometimes need that. Man. That's exactly what it is. It's like coming to see the value of that in a different context when you can't see it in your work context. And your work context blinds you to.
That ball breaking ruled asshole in wherever. He's always on my case about my commission statement or whatever. Yeah,
for sure.
It's interesting. It takes all types, man.
Yeah. For sure, especially in a group-based process where you need many different people at the table to get it done.
It takes all types. It's interesting because I'm kind of like a freewheeler, and in my mind, I pursue creative things. If I didn't have the people that were personalities were completely opposite to mine.
Yeah. It takes a village to get the job done too.
Not only but not only completely opposite, but willing to challenge me back.
Yeah, that's a hard one though, eh? That's a hard one, particularly now. I think people have a very hard time with being challenged because, particularly, I know in a work environment too. Like I've worked for private sector, I worked for a law firm, I've worked for universities. It's different, but there's a real sense of so your personal currency at work, right? And one of the hardest things to get kids to understand, I see this with teachers all the time, is that it's okay to get it wrong. It's not about whether you get it right or wrong. It's how you deal with getting it right or wrong. I know that's a super basic, but it's so important. So students, for example, I'm at the point where I've been teaching long enough and I'm a contract teacher. I don't care what I say anymore. Whatever. Right? Fire me. Ha. I'm a contract worker. I can't, they just hire me for the next gig they need me for. It doesn't matter. So I've looked at students before and I've stopped lectures right in the middle and said, it just occurred to me. I did this a couple of weeks ago, actually. It just occurred to me. Nobody here has asked me a question in like 3 lectures. What's that all about? Any of you have questions right now? They're all looking at each other and, a couple of hands go up. I'm like, you saving them for a better time? Yeah. I'm right here. We're talking about the subject. Why don't you ask me a question? Well, I don't want you to think I'm an idiot. I'm like, oh, here we go, right? Here's this idea. We are so, and the work culture can exaggerate that because then you think, am I going to get my promotion if my boss looks at me and says I've made these mistakes? And, I've talked to people who are involved in HR evaluation and involved in hiring people and stuff like that. And pretty much all of them have said some variation on this. It's not whether or not you've made mistakes at work. Because the work context changes all the time, right? Something that worked here for your company in this year, it might change next year for the technology, for the materials, anything.
Yeah, for sure.
So what you really need is people who are adaptable and flexible, people who can make the mistake, realize it's a mistake, own the mistake, and then do something about it. I worked at a journal for 11 years, an academic journal, and academic journals are writing published articles by academics. If you know anything about academia, publishing is all that matters.
Yeah, that's all. So how many times have you been cited? Or
yeah. They're super concerned that that's done properly. So we rolled out our issue, and because of an editorial mistake that happened outside of my office. They got something wrong about the bio for this guy. And he was a big, important guy in the field. And, my editor called me aside and said, I don't know how we're going to handle this. He's going to be super upset. I'm like, I'll phone him. It's like, oh, you don't want to talk to him. He's a jackass, and he's going to be rude to you, and he's going to get angry, and it's going to reflect badly on you. I'm like, I want to talk to him. Let me call him. Like, all right. So I called him up, and I said, hi. My name is Ian. I'm the managing editor of the journal. Here's what's happened. There's been a mistake in your bio. It's this kind of mistake. Here's where in the process it happened. Here's why it happened. The person that was supposed to do this didn't do that for various reasons. Here's why the reason why he didn't do it. Here's how we're changing our procedures to make sure this will never happen again, because we're going to cut this step out. Here's how we're addressing the fact that the wrong information was published. We're going to publish a reprint, and we're going to publish in the online version. We cannot fix the mistake that was made in the already printed versions. They're out there. That's the end of that. But we can make sure it never happens again. And I apologize to you for this because it shouldn't have happened.
It's our fault?
And ultimately, no, I said it's my fault.
Okay.
I'm the managing editor. I'm the one that runs this crew. I should have caught this. I didn't. And I know why I didn't catch it, and I will make sure that doesn't happen again. He was fine.
Of course he was.
He was fine. That's all he wanted to know. He wanted to know that we were taking it seriously and that we were going to deal with it.
Most lawsuits come from people not doing that.
Yeah. Not
That's
being
where they
willing
come
to,
from. Yeah. So it's interesting. So it's funny how I keep writing notes, and then you keep taking me in another great direction here, Ian. But on that,
I'm a chatter.
Yeah. On that particular subject right there. Okay, we're talking about the corporate apology.
Right.
Okay. So, or the antithetical thing to that, the cover up.
Right.
The blame shifting. Right. Okay. So there's nothing grosser to me than an obvious screw up by a company.
Right.
Okay. I'll tell you a story. How about that? I'll give you a story.
On.
All right. So, I have a pool. I built a pool, and it has these steps. Like stone, like the pool has a liner.
Yeah.
And has these steps that you get down, and they're stone. They sit on like a pond liner on top of the liner.
Okay.
And so, something was happening, and the pool kept getting green.
Oh, okay.
Like it kept going like soup green, like pea soup green. It would go pea soup green. And then they'd come and shock the crap out of it. A week later, it would go pea soup green again. Like way green. So we tested the water. Someone must have dumped fertilizer in your pool. Do you have any enemies? This kind of stuff. Is somebody doing this sort of stuff to you, right? And so the pool company keeps coming back, dumping shock in the pool and leaving. And then every time they shock it, they spill a little bit of chlorine, get that clean, gets on the side of the deck and stains the thing a little bit, right? And starting to get annoying. We've lost 3 weeks of the summer now with the pool, and it looks like crap in the backyard and all this sort of stuff, right? And so I meditate. So I said, you know what? I'm going to go meditate beside the pool.
Okay.
Right? So I'm sitting there on my little towel, and I cross my legs, and I go into meditation. And I'm not like an hour long, but I can do a solid 10, 15 minutes of meditation.
That's hard, actually.
It's actually easy for me.
Well, easy now.
I have techniques that I could share with people to make it real easy for them.
Cool.
People try to start with the hardest meditation, which is the cross-legged with your hands up like this. They're not moving.
Right.
And then, the focus on the breathing. They start in the hardest position to meditate possible.
Oh, okay.
Right? Huh. Don't start meditating there.
Oh, okay.
That's where you go to. Go to the physical at the end.
Right.
Start by spending some time quiet time for 5 minutes. See if you can stay quiet for 5 minutes and keep your eyes shut.
Okay.
Let's start with that, with a little bit of music on it. You know what I mean? So, but everyone starts with trying to be Buddha, right? I'm serious. But anyway, so I'm meditating beside the pool. I'm like, the steps.
They're on top of the liner, right?
Yeah. So I lift up the steps, completely coated with green goo under it, right? Yeah. So I called the pool company up, right? So like, oh, great, you figured it out. I'm like, yeah, I got it figured out. So I cleaned it out with my son. It took way longer than I thought, but anyway. So then they sent me an invoice for all the times they came and shocked the pool anyway.
Really?
Yeah, and I thought to myself, like, you know what? You guys are the pool experts.
Yeah. And something, the minute you said that set of steps is on top of the liner, my first thought was, well, wouldn't there be crap caught under these?
Yeah.
I don't know. Makes sense to me.
Yeah. I never even thought. I thought they're going to fix it. They're going to fix it. They're going to fix it.
They're the experts, so I'll let them decide, right?
They left a stone unturned.
There you are. Yeah. Scotty's coming in hot. He's coming in hot.
Damn, why I didn't think of that.
Yes. Oh. No, but well
played.
And then so you get into an argument with them, and they're like, well, we didn't know it was the stones. And I'm like,
but you should have. That's your job.
So
dude.
I'm like, I told her, she's
Yeah.
like, well, we came there where the chemicals were there. We have records. I'm like, I'm not disputing that you came here. I'm not disputing that you dumped the chemicals in my pool.
Right.
I'm not disputing any of that. I'm disputing the fact that you could just say sorry.
Yeah. You can own it.
Yeah, let's start off with, hey,
yeah.
sorry about that. Shit.
Yeah.
You lost 3 weeks of the summer. You know what? You know what I'm going to do? Because we really value your business and we screwed up.
Yeah.
You know, X, Y, or Z. No, just an invoice. That's it.
Yeah.
And then, what? I thought the problem was fixed. And it's like, yeah, you know what I mean? It's like,
No, I hear you on that.
it goes back to the old question. Why would someone want to do business with you?
Yeah.
Why you? Not the
not-
name of your company, man.
Yeah.
Why Ian Slater?
They're not looking for a repeat business, though, at that point. There's a business model that says you can give up repeat business in exchange for getting money anytime you possibly can. And that's a decision, right? It's a decision on how you want to run your business. I had an experience this year where I had a student who played with me for a year. And then this year, the parent basically said he wouldn't be available. And I'm pretty good at reading people and messages. And I was like, nah, there's something going on there.
Yeah.
So I contacted the parent separately and said, is this a financial concern? Because if so, we can sort something out. And she's like, well, she didn't say that, but she sort of heavily implied that's exactly what it was. It was a financial issue. I said, well, tell you what, just let him play without paying this year. No biggie, right?
Sure.
And don't tell him you're doing that. He
Yes.
doesn't need to know, and the other kids don't need to know.
Yes.
Just give him the opportunity. And then when you get back on your feet, you don't have to pay me for it. We'll just forget about it. And then just the next time he's available, sign him up. And all's good. Now, I gave up a certain amount of money by doing that.
Sure.
Absolutely. And in some ways, as a business person, someone might think, that's crazy. You could have, so you're not getting the kid. I'm like, well, I wasn't going to get the kid anyway. This way, I'm getting a kid who's coming in. I'm getting a parent who knows their child got the opportunity to do this. She's going to talk to other parents.
Sure.
Right now, I didn't do it for that reason, but I think there's positives to be gained from here we forget about.
That's the difference
right?
between a bean counter and an entrepreneur.
Yeah,
Okay?
I agree. I think
Get the bean counters out of here. There's times
you're playing the long game.
Yeah.
And you know that it may
For
not
sure.
financially turn out for you in the short game, but in the long run, that positive kind of energy and that positive energy is kind of a vague word, but that positive talk, that sense that, hey, this guy isn't just in it to make money out of it, he's also in it to help out. I had an experience with one of the kids in the class where I noticed his nervous tics, and I could tell what was making him nervous during the game session. So I went to the parent. I said, look, I've noticed this about your son. He tends to get nervous when this happens. And she looked at me and she's like, wow, how do you figure that out? I'm like, well, whenever this was happening in the game, he started playing with the dice differently. And I noticed he was doing this sort of tick, 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 tick thing. I thought that was kind of odd. And I figured maybe he's nervous. And she's like, that's really perceptive that you noticed that. But because of that, I changed the way we did the procedures a little bit in the game so he didn't have to feel that nervousness again. I didn't have to do that. He didn't ask me to do it, but it's like, why not? Right?
Why not? Yeah.
I think there's I think the desire to make sure that your business is profitable is obviously important. If you don't make money, you don't get to be a business and it's all over. But there's a huge margin between chasing down every possible way to make money and, giving it all away.
Sure.
And I think businesses often err on the side of the other one. They're bottom line focused. They're quarterly focused for various reasons, particularly if you have investors, right? Like if you're an independent business, that's one thing. But if you've got investors that are looking for quarterly reports.
I think that's the difference between, so for example, that's why family-run firms tend to way outlast non-family-run firms.
Right.
Like you have like European firms that are generations after generations.
Yeah.
It's interesting. American capitalism and European capitalism are two different things completely. Right? They're different animals. Like I know a lot. So I run an American Trade Association, right, for lighting, and those guys. There's a lot more buying and selling of businesses in the United States.
Yeah.
It's funny how people look at Canada and they'll say the Canadian economy is 10% the size of the United States, right?
Mm-hmm.
It's actually not. It's not even close to that.
Oh.
When you're talking GDP, okay, fine, right?
Yeah.
We dig up a lot of sand and we cook it, and we cut down a lot of trees and we ship them, and we dig a lot of the earth up and we send it somewhere else.
Yep.
Okay, but Americans don't do a lot of that. Americans are running legitimate, high-value businesses.
Right. So there's value added to.
Right.
Whatever
So
you're working on.
exactly.
Yeah.
So you're when it comes to like the only region that's really comparable to like California is Southern Ontario.
Yes.
Quebec a little bit, but not really.
Yeah.
I mean, Southern Ontario is the only area that's dynamic like Texas, California, New York.
Sure.
It's Chicago area. Like it's even that though, because it's a small country, there isn't the same exchange, like the wild free spirits of capitalism, right?
Right.
Where people are, I'm going to sell my business. They find a business broker. They sold their business 6 months later for a good sum of money.
Right.
Because there's another entrepreneur out there that's like, I can do something with that. I can do something with that.
Right.
We don't have that as much in Canada. There also isn't the finance available as much for that. What was my point though here, Ian? I'm trying to remember my point. I had a point.
Family-run firms.
Oh, family-run firms. So what you're seeing, so what happens is you have like this slower generational growth
Right.
in Canada and in Europe and in other places where it takes more time. The business is kind of, and this is like me generalizing in my anecdotal experience, but there's pros and cons to it. Quarterly targets, that's too short a time frame.
Yeah.
It's too short a time frame. And the other thing is that, like, even so, if a company's being run by, I'll tell you another anecdote. This one might be more interesting. So my wife's uncle was heavily involved in the auto business, okay, in Canada, making auto parts for the big three.
Got it.
And in 2008, the crash happened, and the GM and four guys, they all flew to Washington. Didn't drive, right?
Yeah.
And that was a big thing, right? And everyone was pissed off. And I said, what's wrong with GM? And my wife's uncle said, well, nobody at GM knows how to build a car.
Oh.
Right? I'm like, what are you talking about? He goes, yeah, the whole upper management's accountants.
Yeah.
It's like, there's nobody that knows how to build a car.
Yeah. That historically speaking, this is where I jump out of the conversation. Historically speaking, that happened more or less in the 1920s and 30s. So the early part of the 20th century, there was a rise of what they call the professional managerial class, which is basically people who are managers that didn't necessarily come up through the business. They didn't necessarily know the business incredibly well. They knew how to manage people, finance things, raise capital, do those
cut expenses.
Yeah.
Sure.
So that's what they did well.
Create supply chains. Yeah, sure.
But did they actually know the business? Not necessarily. And that became the sort of standard. And that's the way we work today. So people get hired as managers. Now, if they have experience in the industry, that's a positive, obviously. If you've got managing experience and you've worked in the industry, of course you're a good choice. Having said that, many people are career managers that don't do that. They don't necessarily stick to a particular industry or stick to a particular business. Their job is to be a manager.
Yes.
And I think that exactly creates what you're talking about. It creates this sort of disconnect and this desire, because a manager is only performance-based.
Sure.
Their only focus is whether or not they meet their quarterly targets, because the investors in the company are the ones that determine what they do. So it completely changes the focus. This is why, just a little political thing here, but this is why it's not good to have a for-profit education system. Because in a for-profit education system, your goal is profit, right? Because you're for profit. That's what your goal is. Now, if some education happens along the way,
you have a
for-profit
Dungeons and Dragons game.
Oh, absolutely, I do. Yeah.
Right, but you manage it in a way that's correct.
But it's different for me because it's not my sole income. So here and education. I've got other things going on.
Let's unpack the education argument.
Yeah, sure.
Because I think it's an issue.
Yeah, I'll give you an example. It's always easy to talk first about examples because it's a little more relatable. So here's a good one. When I started teaching,
I don't necessarily disagree with you.
I don't think you do. I want to
understand what you mean.
I want to be clear about it. So when I started teaching 18 years ago, there were more full year classes that went September to June. And then over the course of the last 10 years, that's changed.
Semester everything.
Yeah, semester everything.
Like French and math should be September to June.
I agree. Yeah. So the shift over to this was done primarily for economic reasons, because it gives you more class choice. It allows students a little bit more flexibility. They're not committed to a whole year for a particular course. And it allows you, as is often the case, if it costs this much to take a full year course, it doesn't cost half as much to take a single term course. It costs like 3/4 as much. So it allows them to sort of make a little bit more money too, right? So it works for them financially. Class sizes as well, by the way, have been increasing steadily. When I first started teaching a general education first year course,
that's not because it's for profit.
Yes, actually, that's the largest.
Are you talking about university?
Yeah, I'm talking about university.
Okay.
Yeah. That's the largest reason for it. The reason they want more asses and seats is that everybody that sits in that classroom pays a little bit of money. The number of reasons why you're allowed to get exemptions for exams are very tight and restricted, and students often wonder about that, because one easy example that lights my fire is work, right? 75 to 85% of my students have part-time jobs. If that's the case, should they get exemptions from various different components of the course if it conflicts with their work? I believe they should. I think they should, because I think if you have, like some jobs, you can go to your boss and say, look, man, I got a test next Tuesday. I can't come in for my shift. And your boss is going to go, yeah, no sweat. We'll get so-and-so to cover you. No big deal. Other jobs, you call up and say, I can't make it in next Tuesday to my shift. They're like, well, then we'll find somebody else to do your job. We'll see you later. Now, I've had students that have come to me very, very stressed about this kind of stuff, saying, I can't, and it's been months ahead of time. Like it hasn't been that, they come to me 2 days before and go, oh, my boss said I couldn't come in.
Oh,
No,
yeah.
no, no, no.
I didn't look at my schedule properly.
Yeah, no, they're giving me lots of warning. Like, I cannot miss work. This is not something I can do. So York doesn't give any exemptions for work-related things. And students ask me, why wouldn't they do that? Because they want your money. They want you to fail and have to come back and take the course a second time to finish your degree.
No
absolutely, that's
way.
what it is. I think, that's my view of it. And I'm not going to say I've done a lot of research here. But what other reason?
I can't be that. I'm cynical.
Okay, but then ask yourself this
that's
question.
Really cynical.
What other reason could there be?
You just said that York University wants them to fail.
Well, I've said, York University wants to make money from them.
Right, yes.
One mechanism
you said
to do
they
that.
want you to fail.
Yeah.
I don't think that's true.
If you're in that circumstance. They're not willing to make the accommodation for you, right? They'll give you the accommodation.
That's different than wanting.
Okay, sure. Let's rephrase it then. Fair enough.
Yeah, like
so
the
what we're
word
saying
wanting is
they're
like that's a little bit heavy for me.
Well, I wonder though. Okay,
you wonder about it. Sure.
Let's give you an
or maybe you say, do they even care? Like that's the question you ask.
Sure. Let's ask. The example of the full course being converted into a half course. One of the things that happened when this happened was they took a lot of existing full year courses and they came to the profs and the course instructors and said, you need to convert this into being a semester course as opposed to a full year course. So I went into my cave and started, taking out readings and removing things in order to make it possible to teach the same material in that time. And I was told very clearly that that's not the idea. You should be teaching the same amount of material, but just be doing it in essentially half the time. No, you can't do that. So all these decisions, every single one of them.
Well, I mean, that's someone that doesn't understand what you're trying to do.
Yeah. But what's the effect of these decisions? Higher class sizes impacts the learning experience. Compacting a full year's worth of stuff into half a year without removing any of the material impacts the learning experience. Not allowing students to get exemptions when they have work-related problems, that impacts the learning experience. Every decision I've just explained to you has a consequence of making the learning experience worse. However, it also has the corollary consequence of making more money for the institution.
Interesting.
This is why I get to this place. I say to myself, they can't be concerned about, the only way that I think they are is that if enough students graduate and don't learn well, it's going to look bad for York. And this isn't just York, by the way. Let's be very clear about this.
That's a
most
very
universities are like this,
unclear,
right?
like muddy water place. That
Sure.
the old adage D equals degree, buddy. You know what I
Right.
mean? Like, I mean, that's what it is.
Sure.
Let me
do you
throw
mean by that if even if they do graduate students that don't do particularly well, it doesn't really matter? It's just the degree that
they got
matters?
their degree. They got their BA. So here's what's interesting. You had mentioned earlier in this conversation that, you're pretty left wing or you lean left. What was it? You're out on the wing or something like that, right?
I'm a left-leaning guy politically from the most
So
part.
I've only heard arguments for the against higher education from the right. Okay.
Right. Yeah. I'm an internal critic.
Right. And now I'm like, I'm never sending my kids to university. I mean, it's like I feel like there's a sense that we were talking again, Scott and I kind of unpacked my life show to Scott a little bit, like what I'm trying to achieve with it, right? And one of the things that I think is a big problem in our society is that people are induced into debt.
Yes. Yeah.
They're induced into it. It's not a sign of bad character, dude.
No, not at all. Yeah.
You understand what I'm saying?
I do. A mortgage is a debt machine.
No, but mortgage ain't so bad.
Oh, okay.
Like except that the house is of 1.5 million. But I mean, that's a different. That's not my point. Yeah. But I mean, what I'm talking about is like I remember, and I see now, like credit card advertising on university campuses. Yeah. That is like tobacco advertising.
Sure it is.
Come on.
That's exactly what I'm talking about, right?
I mean, come on. TD Visa there, they have I love it. There was this one ad when I was at Queens that they had an interracial couple holding hands running on the beach. Yeah. You're going to be free with this thing. It's like, it's actually the opposite
of that. Yeah, yeah.
It's the complete opposite of that, man.
Yeah.
It's not fun and excitement. It's debt and chains, man. And I think the universities, particularly in the United States, but also in Canada, have bought into this. Yeah, borrow from the government,
sure,
and spend with us.
Yeah, no, for sure. Yeah.
Model, and it's like I'm not sure I'm so comfortable with that. Especially people coming out of university with $10,000 in credit card debt or $20,000 in credit card debt and $80,000 in student debt.
Something. Here's a hopeful thing. I'll give you some. I haven't given a lot of hope here. Here's a hopeful thing. Sure. The fact that 85% of my students work suggests that they're aware of the fact that that this is something they need to do something about, and they're doing something actively to deal with it. Now, I'd love it if they didn't have to work. I'd love it if they could actually focus on their studies in a way that they can't when they do that much time at work. But I think it's fantastic, and I think it's one of the things I get a lot lot of, because I teach students in this sort of 18 to, most of them are in the 18 to 20-year-old range. And then there's, older and younger. And there's a real assumption that students are lazy. They don't want to work. They're not motivated. And this is all just utter bullshit. That's not the case at all. When 85% of my
First
students
of all,
go to school and work,
anytime that somebody,
on,
you know
right?
what, hang on a second.
Yeah.
You know what? There's nothing more disgusting to me than when someone talks about millennials. It's like, what do you know about 5 million people?
Yeah. No, for sure.
I had a guy in my lighting show the other day. He's a Korean American, fair enough, right? Yeah. And he wants to speak on behalf of the preferences of all Asians,
right?
From India to Japan.
Come on, yeah.
Come on, dude. Yeah. You know how Asians like lighting to be this color. You're talking about 3 billion people.
Yeah. I'm pretty sure there's some variance in their lighting preferences
I don't
right?
I really uncomfortable when people, and I think it does people a huge disservice, man. Yeah. To put them in some box and wrap it up and say this is what you are and this is what you need and this is how you behave, and now I'm feel good now. I'm done.
Yeah,
I don't have to take any effort on you personally or think about you. Yeah. It's really sad. But I'm glad to hear that, the students are working. I just wonder to myself sometimes if maybe the whole model, I like the trade model.
Okay. Yeah.
You know
college
what I mean?
Model, right?
Yeah. No, not even college, but for example, let's say
apprenticeship.
Apprenticeship model. Yeah. That's right. Yeah. Sorry. Apprenticeship model where you're paid to learn.
Yeah.
While you're learning, you're doing something to contribute to the job that's being done.
Yeah.
Right. And I'm wondering, can't we apply that in some other way? Isn't there a way that we could apply that? I'll tell you this, man. There are so many guys. So I've hired and trained probably since 2003. When 2005, I really started going. I've probably trained maybe 60 people.
Okay.
20 of which were new Canadians that came here with electrical contracting credentials from other countries all around the world, South Africa, Iran, a couple still work for me, but they came through here, were trained, and then moved on and started their own electrical contracting companies or went to work for other lighting companies and all this sort of stuff. And just from my perspective, and I'm not abnormal, lots of industries do this kind of training for people. Sure. I wonder whether that's the better model.
Well, actually, that was the original model. Original universities set up in the 1200s, I think, 1400s. Universities were apprenticeship based. Basically, you studied with a particular person. You didn't study a subject, so to speak. You studied with that person and whatever it was that they knew, and that's what they taught you. So you and 2 or 3 other people would study with this other person. Now, it's not apprenticeship in the sense of building a house together, but as they were doing their research, you'd help them with that. You would do whatever their research. So if they were researching something, you'd be reading the same books and collecting information for them and going out. When I was in graduate school, we did something called an annotated bibliography, where a prof would come to you and say, this is for senior year work, right, or graduate school. So my first year of graduate school, one of my profs came to me and said, for your project this term, like how you're going to earn your grade, one of the things you're going to do is write an annotated bibliography. So here's what it is. I pick a topic. You go out and research that topic. And for every single source that you find, you do a summary for that source to tell me what it's about and how it will be useful to the question I'm investigating. So I don't have to do it. And then I go out and I'd read 50 books, 70 articles. I distill them down into the list of what I thought were the most important articles and the most important books. And I would explain what they were about and how they'd be useful to the thesis he was arguing or she was arguing. And then they would go and, based on my summaries and recommendations, say, well, I should probably read this. I don't need to read that. Sort of under-laboring for it. But it was a part of me taking part in their research process. So it's the kind of stuff you're talking about. So there's
Scott is doing the annotated bibliography for the lighting business. It's called the Light Read.
There you go.
Huh, Scott? He reads. He goes out every week and reads every article he can possibly find related to lighting.
Oh, and then he comes back and reports.
Summarizes it.
See, that's exactly it.
And he puts it into a thing we call it the Light Read.
Right.
And we have a software tool that helps him find these articles that searches the internet. And brings them in, and he's got to read them and summarize them.
That's perfect. Look, when my first job, I
changed it at the annotated bibliography. I love it.
That's awesome. I worked for a brief period in the UK, and I worked for a journal there, and the journal was called. There's actually 4 or 5 of them. They're called Current Opinion.
Okay.
So current opinion in anesthesiology, current opinion in neurology and neurosurgery, current opinion in all this kind of different things. And the job of the journal was, and on a quarterly basis, to go out and contact a section editor. That section editor would identify 10 or 12 subsection editors to go out and read as much of the literature that came out in that field this year and sort of summarize it for the readers. And the reason they were doing this was there was so much medical information being published.
Sure, yes.
It was completely unrealistic to expect individual practitioners or researchers to keep up on it. So we're dealing with a volume of information.
They need the light read.
Yeah, they need the light read. That's exactly what it is. And I think it applies. I think your example is great because it shows it doesn't just apply to academic topics or scientific and medical topics. It applies to everything.
Yeah.
We generate massive amounts of information about stuff. And there's a real role for someone to say, let's just get a handle on what's out there even before we move forward.
If you find a topic, but we actually do a light read.
Nice.
So we do a video where Scott and my co-host or whatever will discuss each headline, or Scott by himself.
Right.
We'll just say, Detroit's the street lights are out of Detroit. They're replacing them again. Right. And the next one, down to the next one, it'll go along. And it's like, if you want to click, if you want to read more, you click.
So I think there is a model for exactly what you're talking about in academia. You could have an academic model that involved that kind of apprenticeship. The challenge is it can't be done in classes of 250 students.
Yeah.
And that's
I'll
really
tell you my
where
best class. So the Comrade and Lawrence was in Queen's University of Belfast.
Right.
So I did an exchange there.
Oh, nice.
And it was 3 people, 3 hours a week.
Yeah. That's the gold standard.
If you didn't read that book, buddy.
Yeah, it's an uncomfortable 3 hours.
You get asked to leave.
Yeah, no, absolutely.
You get asked to leave. It's like
grad school's like that. Grad school is very much you've got 1,200 pages to read for next week and sit down and you better know what you're talking about, right?
Yeah.
No, that's the challenge is just the numbers. There's just it's so hard to teach with that model past. That's why it only happens in grad school because the numbers are just too big. You can't do that with 250.
Do we have too many people in university? Maybe.
To some degree, yes. I think there's. I have to be very careful about this because I don't want to be exclusionary to any group of people. But I can say this: I meet on a regular basis. I'd say about. This is hard to quantify, but I'd say about 10 to 15% of my students don't belong there. Now, it's not because they shouldn't be there. They don't have the right to be there. It's that they don't have the study skills. They don't have the ability to focus.
Sure.
They don't have the ability to read that well.
Yeah, sure.
And in some, I have this argument. I had this argument so many times with colleagues about computers in the classroom, right? A lot of my colleagues have read the studies that suggest that computers in the classroom can be distracting because they can be.
Or they are.
However, there's ways to get around that. There's things you can use the technology differently to get rid of those issues. And most students, I'll say this with a certain degree of certainty, most students can't write anymore. They cannot take notes.
They can't. Yeah, for sure.
They can't take notes.
I agree with that. Yeah.
So if you're sitting and lecturing, there's no meaningful way they're going to be able to keep up with you and learn anything if they don't have a computer with them, right? So you have to kind of adapt to the audience that you have.
You know what's weird is that you know what's so strange? So I was a great essay writer.
Right.
Really good.
Yeah, I was good at that too, actually. Yeah.
And so in first, I think it was first year or second year, I went to Queen's. Right. So I'm a big shooter.
Queen's is one of the 2 feeder schools for my hometown. So
is it? Yeah.
Queen's and Carleton. So
So I went, and so it was weird because everyone at Queen's had an A in high school.
Right. I get that.
Right. So then it gets redistributed.
Yeah. And some of them are very distressed because they're like, "What the hell happened?"
My goodness! Right. So I had I can't remember what my average was in high school, but my average at Queen's was 77, I think, or 78, which was okay. That's middle of the road. Yeah. It was good. But the thing was I never took a note in my lectures of the classes I enjoyed.
Right. Yeah.
I remember this one professor Malcolmson. He taught modern Western civilization.
Right.
And he would like watching him. I would just enjoy his lectures, like entertainment for me, right?
Yeah.
And I remember he wrote this book, Beyond Nuclear. Yeah, we're talking 25 years ago, and I remember his lectures. I remember the book he wrote, Beyond Nuclear Thinking. Yeah. He wrote.
Nice.
I remember monarchical authority. I remember this monarchy. He would speak like this. In the monarchical authority in the Middle Ages seemed to go into eclipse, and he would speak like this, and he would pause, and it was like a performance.
Sure.
And I absolutely loved it. And I never took one note, and I did well in the class. I can't remember what I got, but I did well in the class.
But, everybody learns differently. I had a student in one of my classes when I first started teaching and it's funny, people don't realize this, but if there's 250 people sitting in front of me, I actually do see all of you and sort of notice things about you, even though it doesn't seem that way. And there's one guy would never
When you're speaking, dude, you can see the people that are listening to you.
No, for sure.
Yeah.
And they don't realize how much of that you take in.
Yeah.
It's a 3-hour lecture, right? And it's a couple of times, many meetings. And I had this one student who never took notes. He just sat there. He doodled a little bit. He didn't take notes. And it drove me nuts because I just started teaching. And all I could think of is, why won't he take notes? Why isn't he listening? What am I doing wrong that I haven't engaged the student in any way? Because he hasn't taken a note all term. It was terrifying, right? So one day before the class got started, I came in, I sat down beside him and said, look, it's killing me. I got to ask you something. Like, what's wrong? He's like, you never take notes. How do you learn? And he sort of smiled. He's like, I can't learn when I'm taking notes. When I'm writing, I can't focus. I need to just sit and listen. If I'm not interrupted and I can focus on what you're saying, I retain 90% of what's being said. And then I'll jot down a note occasionally if there's a complex term or something like that. But for the most part, I learn by listening.
That word I don't know the definition of or something like that.
And what it made me realize...
That's me.
Yeah.
That was me.
What it made me realize was very early on, there's lots of
You're an interesting professor?
Well, I hope so. But it also made me realize that there's a lot of different kinds of learning. People learn in different ways. And if you're sitting, again, the more students you have, the more chances there are that you're going to have people that don't respond particularly well to your way of teaching, right? Smaller class sizes are good for a whole bunch of different reasons, and that's one of them, right? I know that sitting in my classroom are going to be people that won't learn well given the way I teach. Now, the good news is most of them do. Otherwise, I wouldn't be good at what I do, right? Otherwise, I realize this isn't working for me or for them. But it doesn't mean there aren't going to be people that don't fit the model very well. And the best way to deal with that is to focus down, reduce your class sizes, and learn more about the learning process so you can separate them out and do different things, right? So I know. It's a hobby horse of mine. I find large class sizes are such a bad idea on every possible level. And
it's a meat grinder.
Yeah, absolutely it is.
It's a meat grinder.
Yeah, you need some degree of individual attention, and you're not going to get that when you have that many students.
It's a meat grinder. It's a way to weed people out that you don't need till they get to graduate.
And then it leads people to using email almost exclusively, right? Because they don't want to sit around and wait to talk to you. So they end up constantly sending you messages. And I find email to be such a massively inefficient way, except in certain cases, of communicating information. And they'll ask you things which, if I could sit down with you for 2 minutes, we could be done. But it'll be 4 or 5 back and forth email messages, right? People don't want to talk to each other. They're uncomfortable with it because they have this other way of talking with people.
Well, they're also one of 5,000 people in the class or whatever.
Yeah.
250 people in the class. I mean,
I
mean, it takes, listen, to ask a question amongst 3 people, to ask a question amongst 100 people, each time you add, it gets more and more nerve-wracking to stand up, man.
Yeah.
And say absolutely something and stand out.
Yeah.
But Ian Slater.
Yes.
Life is one big game of Dungeons and Dragons, man.
Well,
We're all just playing roles, man. I was thinking about, I think the theme of this thing, it's like, you need a wizard. You need a Gandalf, in the world. You need people that are in. It was interesting because we talked about conflict resolution and that, and you're talking about different kinds of students. Where do you belong? Where do you fit in? Where are your skills going to be honed? And when you're playing that game of Dungeons and Dragons, it's your job to find that out. Yeah. But it's also your job to find that out in life.
Yeah, no, agreed. I think that I very, very, very much see that things that happen at the table have interesting sort of consequences and applications in the day-to-day life of the kids. And when they come into me and say,
you're teaching them life skills, man.
Yeah. And they're also, I'm also teaching them the game themselves so they can take that back home. So like I said, like half the students in both the sessions I run games of their own for their friends.
Wow.
Which is cool. And here's the other cool thing, because people who play D&D are often very attached to the edition that they play. Okay. It's the one they grew up with, or they played when they were kids. And even though there's a lot of new players to the game that are a little older getting to it for the first time, you have a lot of emotional and other connections to the game that you play. But I very much have always told my guys and my girls that, look, it's not about which edition you play, it's about how you run the game. And it makes me very happy that at home, they all run different editions. They play first edition with me. But at home on their own, so one of them runs first edition, another one's second, another one's third, another one's fifth. Like, they do whatever they want. But when they come to play with me, they play this. And I think it's cool. They didn't just do what I'm doing because I told them this is the only thing they can do. Yes. They've taken the skills they've learned playing with me, and they're applying them to different games. I think that's awesome. I want them to, when they're done with me, because I'm not going to have these kids for a long period of time. It's an after-school program for an age bracket. They're with me maybe 2-3 years. When they're done, I want them to be able to run their own games at home. I don't want them to need to come to somebody and pay them to do it. So in a weird way, I'm getting my customers to leave me. That's the idea, right? But there's...
you want to make money, replace yourself.
Yeah.
That's the number one rule. And
that was Gary's, actually.
Gary who?
Gary Gygax.
Oh,
it was,
thank you.
In the book, Master Game Master, it was, look, you play my game until you write your own game.
Yeah.
Then you start a company to publish that game. And then you start a successful convention in your hometown.
Yeah, replace yourself.
Yeah.
But that's a key to making money.
Yeah?
Yeah, it's one of the keys to entrepreneurship. It's if you can replace yourself,
right.
You want to operate in a way that eliminates the need for you.
Right, right. Which is hard for D&D because so much of it is based on how you choose to run the game yourself. I originally started off with a business partner in this. Like, at least that was the idea.
Mhm.
I had a friend who ran games for me. I really liked him. He's a great DM. And so when I started the business and decided to do this, it was a big step for me to do this because I have another job and I've been trying to find a full-time job as well. And so it was like, oh, well, screw with that. I don't know. So I went to my friend. His name's Dean, and I asked him if he wanted to do this with me. And
shout out to Dean. If you got this far in the podcast, we're shouting it out to you.
Dean's an awesome guy and a great DM, and I'd love to work with him. I really, really would. But he wasn't at a place in his life where he could have done that at the time, so he's like, I don't think so. But I thought about that, and I have thought about, well, if this did take off and become successful, it can't all be me. That's not doable, right? I can only run so many hours of games. I can only prep. Right now, I'm currently running 3 different campaigns, my 2 after-school programs and the one for my son and his kids. I can do that. But there's a limit. There's a limit to the amount of different sort of separate individual campaigns you can run and how many hours you can run.
If you replace yourself, there isn't a limit.
That's the thing. So
like you've created more games.
Yeah.
And in doing so, that's why your business is valuable.
Yeah.
Ian, thanks for being a guest on the Get a Grip
Thanks
on
for
Life
having me here.
podcast. No problem, man. 2 hours.
Ah, right on.
I was looking, I'm like, I could, the only way we could keep going is if Scott runs out and gets us a 6-pack. Folks, if you're listening to this and you made it this far, hey, Ian and I really appreciate it. I know he does too. We both had fun. It was a fun time. Ian, you want to send out your website to people? Do you have a website or Facebook links or anything like that?
Yes, I do. So the website is www.blackdragongames.com, and Twitter is at Black Dragon Can, C-A-N. I don't really do anything with the Facebook anymore. I've kind of given it up.
Facebook's out. Mark Zuckerberg, you're done. Actually, he's as richer than ever. But you know what, folks? Also, if you're listening to this, it's on the website. So if you just go back to the website, all those links for Ian's website and his Twitter will be there. And of course, if you got this far, man, you can play Dungeons and Dragons, or you can start a podcast by going to getagripstudios.com. That's getagripstudios.com. Anywhere in the world, fully virtual. Also remote in the GTA, or you can come down here like Ian did. There's nothing like being in person.
Easy to get here, I have to say. I came from downtown.
404, 401, 407, all hot and close, public transportation. Folks, a lot. You know what? If it's a bucket list thing, take it off your bucket list and put it on your fucket list. Okay? Getagripstudios.com. Ian Slater, man, I had a blast.
Cheers.
All the best. Yep.
Cheers.